Okay, I would like to call the September 12th, 2017 Parks and Recreation Commission meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is the roll call. Janet?
Okay. Commissioner Nelson?
Here.
Commissioner Good?
Here.
Commissioner McCormick?
Here.
Commissioner Strother?
Here.
Commissioner Giesecke?
Here.
Commissioner Burke?
Here.
Commissioner Darlene?
Back and here.
Commissioner Kylie?
Here.
Commissioner Scheifert?
Here.
Okay, thank you, Janet. The next item is approval of the meeting agenda. We do have one change to the meeting agenda, and that is we're removing the Tupa Park renaming proposal. So if I could have somebody make a motion for approval with excluding that.
So moved as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, any opposed? Okay, so that passed. And the next item is approval of the meeting minutes from our August 8th, 2017 meeting. And if I could get a motion to approve that.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Okay, so before we move on to the special recognition and presentation section, I wanted to introduce two new members that we have. We have our two new student members for this upcoming year, and that's Brendan Kylie and Ava Schiefert. And they're going to take just a second to tell us a little bit about themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to Brendan.
My name is Brendan Kylie. I'm a junior at Edina High School, and I was interested in joining the commission because I've spent the last few years involved in many different sports and different parks activities across the city, and I thought this would be a great way to start a possible future career in public policy, and this would be a good way to get experience, kind of see how behind the scenes things work in the city.
That's great. Thank you. And now Ava.
I'm Ava Schiefert. I'm a junior at Benilde St. Margaret's, and I'm interested in the parks because I love being outside and I use the parks quite a bit, and I really think that the improvements can really benefit everyone.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We're very excited to have you on the commission and look forward to working with you this year. So we'll move now to the special recognitions and presentation section, and the item on this, for this item is Grandview Green presentation.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Katie Clark-Sieben. I'm a project consultant working with Bill Neuendorf in economic development. Most recently served as the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, and now I'm an Edina resident and excited about this new project that we have underway. So I'm going to give a brief presentation tonight. This project is in concept stage, so we wanted to get in front of the commission, and I'm visiting all the other commissions to give them this presentation as well, to get any initial feedback, thoughts, ideas. You may have things that you'd like us to explore as we move forward. So Grandview Green, what is Grandview Green? Tonight I'm going to give you a little background about the Grandview District, the Grandview Green Project, and where we're headed with this project with next steps. So when we're talking about Grandview Green, we are referring to the idea of placing a lid over Highway 100, roughly between the 50th and Vernon Bridge towards the Eden Bridge. When I use the term lid, I'm referring to essentially a park. So this is an important project for Parks and Rec to be aware of. 2 to 3 acre green space covering the highway that would create new community connections, new green space for community programming and social events, reestablishing street grids, focusing on pedestrian and bicycle pathways, also increasing economic productivity of the airspace above the highway and of land adjacent to the highway, and would encourage or create new opportunities to enhance sustainability practices. And it's also serving as a case study for lid development, as this is a very new thing to the Twin Cities market, to the state of Minnesota. And so we're working closely with MnDOT on how we do this as we're creating a roadmap for other communities as well. So there are currently some other lids in Minnesota. That first picture on top is Longfellow Gardens in Minneapolis, where you can see the cars drive right underneath that green space lid, and when you're on top of the lid, you barely even realize that you're standing above a highway. It's a beautiful park. And the picture below is Leif Erikson Park in Duluth. Grandview Green, if it moves forward, would be the first lid that's focusing on economic development, transportation, green space, and neighborhood connectivity. And all of the other lids in Minnesota maybe touch one or two of these spaces. This is also serving as a case study to uncover how we leverage unused public land to spur new private development. So as you may know, this concept has been underway for quite a few years now. In 2012, the city did a Grandview district development plan, which laid out this framework. Interested in creating a unique identity, serving as an iconic gateway, creating a central commons, creating an opportunity to rethink and reorganize the district's transportation infrastructure, making more accessible to pedestrians and cyclists, and leveraging public resources to create incremental value-creating changes that enhance public realm and encourage private redevelopment. So our thinking with the lid in this project is all in line with that framework that was established in 2012, as well as the 2016 Grandview District Transportation Plan. I highlighted a few words that the study focused on, that the goals that were laid out for short, mid, and long-term changes, accommodate pedestrians and bikers, green space, enhanced bus stops, creating new access to Highway 100 and development parcels. So we're taking all of that information into consideration. In May 2017, I joined this project in April of 2017. So shortly after I joined, we had the results back from our feasibility study. So through that feasibility study, we simply wanted to identify, are there any major fatal flaws to actually moving a development like this forward? And determined, as far as we know today, there are no major fatal flaws. The concept that's been created by an architectural firm, just to give us an idea of what is possible, has the potential to create 13 acres of new buildable land on 16 different parcels, potential for 2,500 new parking spaces, and 2.4 million square feet in private development. And I'll show you a map in a moment. There's only one parcel that's currently on the tax rolls. So it has the possibility in the initial economic analysis, and these are very initial numbers. As we get deeper into this project, those numbers may change. But what we're seeing initially is that tax revenue could go from $2 million to $100 million and create some opportunity to be reinvested back in this district potentially and for other uses. There's a dramatic range in the level of public investment that could be needed for this project. On the low end, it would be about $6.7 million for just constructing one lid segment. It could be upwards of $70 to $90 million if the city, the state, the county decided to get involved in developing those parking spaces and doing roadway improvements. And there could be several public entities that are involved. But the initial economic analysis showed a 348% return on investment over a 15-year period, and that assumes a $37 million investment on the public end.
So the $100 million in revenue, additional incremental revenue, is over 15 years?
Over 15 years, okay. Correct. And we begin to see returns in year 5. So this is a map of essentially part of why this project started. As you'll see, the yellow space is MnDOT land, and the orange space is city land that's either in fee or easement or ownership. So this creates an opportunity for the city to be thinking differently about how are we using this public land. To give you an idea of how a lid over a highway creates new economic development opportunity, this is a graph of a lid. So you'll see that orange and yellow space directly over the cars is the lid itself that would be that green space park. As you build the lid, it creates an opportunity for a new frontage road or development directly over an embankment. So that's sort of the brilliance behind this, is that MnDOT land now becomes available for other uses. It also creates an opportunity for district parking directly next to where motorists would be going through the lid. And we are planning on keeping a fourth lane open as we're thinking about this. Really thinking down the road, there's no plans for any development on with Highway 100. MnDOT has reassured us of that. But maybe 50 years from now, that's light rail or mass transit or electric vehicles, flying cars. I don't know what we'll have in 50 years, but we want to be thinking ahead. The concept itself, so you'll see where 5B is, and then that green space that stretches on down, that's where the lid would be located over Highway 100. So that top street above the lid is Vernon, and then the street right above parcels 11 and 13 is Eden, to give you a sense of how long that green space may be. It also stretches on either side of Vernon and Eden. So about a 2 to 3 acre park. All the parcels that are highlighted here are public land with the exception of 13. Parcel 13 is already on the tax rolls, but the others are not. But you'll see, we're starting to think differently. Parcel 1 and 2 is the City Hall parking lot. So if we create some sort of district parking in this area, that frees up this parking lot space for potential other uses. And again, I will want to reiterate, these are architectural concepts. Basically, it gives us an idea of what could potentially be possible. We're sharing this with commissions now, plan to share this with the broader community in October and November and gather feedback and reconfigure plans, but just gives us something to respond to and something to think through. This plan shows the public infrastructure, so that red road that goes through the center is a new road that would be put in place. Some of the ideas or feedback that have surfaced thus far is to try to make that more of a bicycle pedestrian road, still with some local traffic, but maybe potentially that road cuts off at parcel 16, so it doesn't go all the way through, kind of encouraging a more pedestrian, bicycle-friendly walkway. One idea. And then this was what the architectural firm came up with as far as new road alignments, new intersections. There'd be a phase 1, that blue dotted line, access from northbound Highway 100, and then phase 2 access, a flyover created. To give you a sense of where we think this could be going, if we gain support, if the community is interested in moving this project forward. This is our 5-year vision. 2017 focused on city engagement and public agency engagement. By that we mean partnerships with MnDOT, with Hennepin County, Met Council. We meet with MnDOT every other week to work through many different challenges and concepts. There could potentially be some legislative work that is needed since lid development is so new to the state of Minnesota. We may need some policy statute changes. Exploring funding and financing options. Potentially, maybe it's a special tax district so that it does not carry over and have any impact on Edina residents as a whole. But this new value that's created through the development is somehow reinvested back into this district as one potential idea. In 2017, this next phase, we're also moving into technical studies. So we've completed our feasibility study, and now for the next 4 or 5 months here, we'll be doing another round of studies, a transportation study, market study, sustainability study, and what am I forgetting? Utilities, water, sewer study. That will give us more technical detail that we need to work towards a more feasible, detailed design. These are very much concepts at this stage, so we'll be learning a lot more in the next 4 or 5 months. But potentially, if this does move forward, infrastructure construction could begin 2020, with building construction in mid-2020 and occupancy in 2022. So we think this is probably aggressive, but doable. And the partnership, it will require many different entities working together to make something like this happen, working with all of you and the commission, city council, but with the community being that leading voice for how this land should be used, what that development should look like, what's the community need for this lid, what type of programming should occur in that green space, are there playgrounds, is there a splash pad, is it wide open space for farmers markets and movies in the park and yoga in the park? Is there an amphitheater built on the lid that has high school graduations or arts in the park? There's many different options, and all of you in Parks and Rec know what many of those options are for how this space could be used. So we'll start to reach out to community members and gather that feedback. But we'll be working with the regular comp plan process, potentially convening a fundraising host committee. Some of the lid development that's happened in other cities in the United States, such as Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, they brought together a fundraising host committee to help pay for some of the amenities on the lid. So the children's space was paid for by an individual who decided to contribute dollars. Clyde Warren is the son of one of the major contributors who received naming rights for the park. So there's a variety of ways that we can bring resources into this community resource. So next steps for this project, I'm doing a roadshow to all of the commissions over the next month or so. Last week we held a technical assistance panel with the Urban Land Institute and brought in different professionals in the private development, in affordable housing, in nonprofit sector, and got a variety of insights and feedback on some of these initial plans. So we'll be putting out an official report from that work in November timeframe. And then, as I mentioned, those technical studies are launching right now, and then looking to bring this concept to the community in October, November timeframe, and start to gather insights from the Rotary and Edina Chamber and neighborhood meetings. And then in January 2018, coming back to the Edina HRA and with all of the new information that we have from technical studies and all of you and the community, and see what their appetite is for continuing to explore this concept. So these are two initial renderings. Don't let the white buildings scare you. I know they look very, no personality, corporate. But it's simply an initial architectural rendering for the architect to play with space and figure out what might be possible as far as what could fit in this space that still preserves green space throughout and thinking about public realm opportunities. What I think is most important about this rendering is that you get a sense of the lid itself. So you can see the green lid going through. You can see in the middle there, they're thinking of maybe it could possibly be a children's play area. The lid itself would actually extend beyond Vernon, but we didn't show that in the rendering because we wanted you to be able to see the concept of cars going underneath. And what that creates. But I don't know how many of you have tried to ride a bike through this area or walk through this area. I have 2-year-old twins, and I've tried to push a stroller, and it is not very accessible or friendly. And so this lid would create some real opportunity, I think, for our community in how we get around. And then this is a second rendering of what it might feel like to be on top of the lid, with that green space, a children's area. There's a soccer game at the other end. And then you'll see first floor, maybe that's a restaurant that has the umbrella sitting out. It could be housing. It could be some retail, some office space. We're not sure. But we'll learn more as we take this out to the community and hear from folks on what they think the opportunity is. So that is where we're at today. What I'd love if I could take just a minute and hear from all of you. If you have any questions or any initial feedback, thoughts, ideas, things that you'd like us to be exploring as we move through this process. Parks and Rec is obviously a very important commission and partner in this work. as we continue developing what purpose this may serve for the community. So welcome any thoughts, or please feel welcome to contact me after tonight too, if you would prefer that mode.
Katie?
Yeah.
Member Miller here. I know everything is a concept at this point, but it looked like in one of the renderings, when you're talking about redoing an exit off of 100, that it was kind of coming right up into the middle of the space. I know it's just if you went on.
This one? A yellow flyover? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes. Yep. So I'm trying to figure out, is that end when you say it's flying over, so it's coming up, is it coming up into the lid?
You know, I need clarification on that from the architectural partner, and if he's thinking if it goes over or under the lid, that I'm not sure. But I can look into it and get back to you on how that would exactly work.
Okay, but
Yeah.
but is it also?
Oh, here he has it kind of next to the lid.
Yeah, I'm just wondering where
Yeah.
where it ends up going. What is its purpose? Is it just an exit off of 100 into the whole area?
I think that's the southbound exit. too.
It's the southbound exit. Because if you build a lid over the highway, you're building over the MnDOT right-of-way space that would typically be your circular exit. And so that would be the new exit created.
Okay. And then just, I'm assuming that any green space that expands automatically means any new tax base shrinks? Is that kind of a good assumption?
Well, in this case, we are adding green space over a highway that's not producing any sort of economic productivity at the moment, and we're developing public land that isn't currently producing any taxes. So that initial economic analysis showed that this concept would take tax rolls from about 2 million up to 100 million, and generating new revenue from these parcels that are currently unused public land.
Right, right. But if you took that long green space and you expanded that or moved it around, then
Sure.
you're taking up the possible tax base space.
Correct. Yep.
And then why this third road through there? To me, it seems odd to take kind of a little bit more of a serene space and then plop another road in between two totally functional roads.
Right. I know some of the thinking was around fire and police access, and needing to make sure that they're able to reach some of the buildings that may be built directly next to that lid. So I'm guessing that was probably part of the thinking. But I do know as this concept is continuing to be reviewed and studied, more and more we're talking about that road as how can it be a more pedestrian bicycle road that has the ability for fire and police to use in the case of an emergency. And so it was actually through the Urban Land Institute TAP that one of the panelists suggested that maybe we only extend that road to parcel 16 and have the road end between 9 and 16 so it doesn't go all the way through to Vernon, so that it doesn't become a constant flow of traffic, but really focuses more on pedestrian bicycle traffic. So I think we'll learn more over time as we continue thinking about this, but what's helpful for me to hear and what I'm gathering is a general sense of hoping that is more pedestrian bicycle traffic versus motor traffic going through.
Yeah,
Yeah.
From my point of view, I'd certainly think that would be more congenial to the town. So, okay, thank you.
Can I piggyback on his question? So
Yeah.
I actually live right by here, and I also walk it, and I agree, it's not ideal. So I know we're not for sure in terms of the exit, but currently when I'm going south on Highway 100, I get off and it basically drops me past basically on Eden, and then I curve over to Grange. So is from what you had mentioned, by adding the extra, is it to drop everyone off closer to Eden? And then I'm just thinking about there's a lot of, at certain times, that's why it's crazy to walk on there, is because that there's so much commotion getting off at the same time. So my hope would be that we don't like make people stop more at Eden, and then, because right now it's basically a stop quickly and then turn up here right by the city hall to continue on. When there was a lot of construction last year, it ended up being that people would be stopped there, and then it actually slowed down on Highway 100 too by having that commotion. So that was one question. And then my other question is, although I hope it's not something that actually passes, the talk of the expansion of the Dan Patch line. I was curious on how that would impact this if it does happen.
Yep. So that, I'm not leading that project, so I can't speak to in a detailed way about where that's headed. But one of the things we're thinking about, and that we'll be learning more about in this next phase of studying transportation, is how do we provide some sort of mass transit option here? Maybe, could potentially be a commuter line with Dan Patch, or it could be an express bus option. Maybe in the future there's a light rail connection somehow that's aligned with Highway 100. There's no talk of that at the moment, so I don't want to start that rumor. But Dan Patch would help us connect in with the light rail system.
I guess my challenge back to that would be, especially if this is going to be something that incrementally costs Edina residents, that the actual benefit is to Edina residents. All the talk I've heard of Dan Patch is great for everyone outside of Edina, but not a benefit to those of us who initially might be paying for this and getting quote unquote the benefit. Having a commuter line through Edina is not going to do a good value so much for Edina residents, but maybe for those outside of Edina. So I want to make sure that we keep that into consideration, because obviously if this is going to cost us something, and we have a lot of things costing Edina right now already with the schools, that we keep that in mind.
Hi, Katie. Greg,
Hi.
good. Thanks for the presentation. Couple questions. One on the land. The underlying land seems to be primarily MnDOT owned. The lid and other acreage that's created, where does that ownership go? Does that become Edina property, or is that still Minnesota owned?
Excellent question. So these are the types of discussions we're having with MnDOT currently, since this is such a new potential development that could happen. Twin Cities landscape could look very different with multiple lids over highways and interstates. They've been a fantastic partner, and so we're having discussions not only about who's owning, operating, maintaining the lid itself. MnDOT has a vested interest in making sure that any structures above motorists are safe, similar to how they do bridge inspections. But in other communities, the lid maintenance and operations tends to fall on either Parks and Rec or a separate 501c3 that's set up with some sort of endowment fund to do that work. So we're still exploring possibility. The other really interesting piece that's connected to that discussion is the new value that's created. So you put the lid in place, and now we're creating valuable land over a MnDOT embankment. So that's MnDOT, land, but we're having that discussion about who benefits from that new value creation. Is it reinvested back directly into this project, or a portion of it invested here? Is there some sort of larger community benefit where communities like the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul's interested in having a lid over Interstate 94, or a shared resource amongst communities in the Twin Cities or the state somehow? So they are very much in this new territory just as we are, and we're learning together, and we're exploring together and thinking about possible options. So those are the discussions that were happening, and very happy to report that it's a very transparent conversation in the spirit of partnership and trying to come up with a model that will work for here in Edina, but potentially work for other communities as well.
So good discussions, but nothing decided yet.
Far from a decision. Okay. Yeah, just beginning to explore what are all of those mechanisms and models that could potentially work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second question. Clearly, this is a long-term plan. The transportation studies seem to indicate kind of 3 phases of years. Are those intended to also imply that at each phase there's some kind of go or no-go decision to continue? Or is this a, you know what, this is 30 years out and we're committed 30 years out, going for everything?
Thus far, this has been very much a let's explore, then check in with HRA. So they said, yes, let's move forward with a feasibility study. So we went through that process, came back to HRA and shared, here's what we've learned from the feasibility study work. They said, okay, interesting. 348% return on investment isn't so bad. Let's continue exploring. So now we're moving into the technical study phase and then coming back in January with what we learned from that process. So that 5-year plan that we laid out, there's an Excel spreadsheet with much greater detail on what that 5 years could potentially look like. And it'll be a continual, update. Here's what we've learned. Here's where we think this can head. Do we keep moving forward or not?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I believe I heard you say October, November timeframe, you start to engage the community more. So community being in the center of that circle, does that mean we really haven't gotten a sense for the community's feedback and impressions on this project yet?
Not specifically these architectural plans.
Okay.
So there's been a lot of community engagement prior to my time with the Grandview District Plan in 2012, with the Grandview Transportation Plan, but this is the first time we'll be coming out with the Grandview Green concept and collecting ideas and feedback. So very much initial concept at this stage, and still socializing, thinking through, is this right for our community? What should it look like? And trying to be innovative, and how can we use this in this opportunity to really benefit our community.
Okay, and then just 3 items of feedback for you.
Yeah, thank you.
So one would certainly be that that community feedback being in the center is going to be critically important, right? I mean, we certainly hear it on everything that we do, and I imagine it'll be a big part of whether this generates enough excitement or not. Second, I know you said ignore the scary white buildings, but certainly I get the sense of this becomes it really intensifies the urban feeling of the Grandview area. At least by seeing that visual, and you immediately think, oh boy, this is a big urban space. The white buildings make me think of Washington, D.C. or something, right? We're going to put all these big monuments or memorials, one way or another, I think that would have to shift. At least that's not something that's a positive impression for me. And well, if you start naming them after my family, and just call it a good building, that's okay. And go either way. And then the third would be, I guess I remain very suspect of early financial considerations, right? Seems like an awful lot of money, and I'd still question what the payback is, and wouldn't quite hang my hat on somebody saying they're going to get 350% return on this yet. So I'd want to see a lot more on the financials before I, again, get pretty excited about it. So
thank you.
Thank you.
So Katie, I really like the connectivity. We'll just go down. The connectivity, I think that's fantastic. It's so difficult to get across that area, and I see kids with their bikes, young kids trying to cross over, and it's just so dangerous. So I think the whole idea is fantastic. I was wondering if you had any examples of these other states that you have that one slide that said, a lot of times these lids factor in one thing. It's a green space or it's a transportation space, but this proposal has us really in all different categories. So are there any examples that you have where other states have done that you could just share?
Yeah, so the larger lids that are much larger than what we're thinking about here, Clyde Warren Park in Dallas is a great example. Millennium Park in Chicago is a lid. Seattle is planning for about 8 different lid developments. Currently, there's the Big Dig in Boston. San Diego has lids in place. So hopefully that, these are the very large scale in major metropolitan areas. Our 2 to 3 acre lid is a little different than Clyde Warren Park, but could still provide some of those same benefits.
Okay, great. And those lids have all the multifaceted pieces, public, private space, incorporating parking and all of that. Yeah, I think that would be helpful to get a kind of an overview of those, because I'm not as familiar. Some of those I am, but not all of those. The other question I had is, we spent a lot of time in this area over by Vernon and this Arcadia area on our community center, trying to figure out how could we have a community space. And I was wondering if you've thought about that as a group, like is there a way not only to have a park, but to have something inside to, we were really looking at the senior center, an art space, maybe a performance area. But I think there were other things the community had asked for that we weren't able to incorporate.
You're the second commission that I've presented to, and that very topic came up last night as well. So I'm expecting, as I present to other commissioners, that I'm going to hear that interest in a community center. So that's something that we can kind of put on our list of things to think about. The Health Commission is interested in a swimming pool and space for people to run and walk. Park Commission probably has some of those same interests. So yeah, I think it's something that we'll continue exploring.
Okay, good. So I think that'd be great to have on your list. And I think that even will fit better with the green space, because if this green space is just surrounded by private enterprises, it's not as inviting from a park perspective. So, and then the other thing I think which you have already mentioned, but it's just the traffic flow. That was something that was really difficult over in the space we were looking for more for the community center. And we just want to make sure that we've got the right traffic flow so it doesn't bottle the whole area up. And then to Greg's point, one thing I think we were surprised is the cost associated with that community center when we finally got down to the numbers. And this area is so much bigger, and I think it's more parking. So just to really make sure that you guys hone in on that cost perspective or the cost detail early on, so you don't get surprised. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Julie Strother, I second what was said about access. I think our city crossing over the highways and connecting the city can be really difficult, and this is an opportunity to address that here. I did have a question. You mentioned that the maintenance of it might be falling to the Park and Recreation Commission, and I would just encourage you to think about that, because it seems like although the lid itself is going to be a park, presumably because you can't structurally build on the lid or make it much more expensive, it seems like though the part of what's driving this is redevelopment space, and it seems like a big project for the Park and Recreation Commission or the Parks and Rec Department to be maintaining what is ultimately a structure over a roadway and not just a park. And so I guess, do you know how other cities have dealt with that with a lid?
Yeah, it's a variety of ways. So Clyde Warren Park created their own 501c3 that allowed them to do some private fundraising, and the 501c3 is responsible for operations and maintenance, but they do have some sort of partnership, and I'm unclear exactly what that agreement looks like, but with DOT and Parks and Rec and the city. There's a variety. The Commons Park in downtown Minneapolis is a local example of Minneapolis Parks and Rec decided to not take that on, and there's a separate 501c3 doing the programming, operations, and maintenance. of that park. So pros and cons to those different structures. I think in this very initial phase, we've been just sharing information, making sure Anne is invited to different meetings and engaged early on in the process so that we can work together and try to come up with what is that right balance, whether it's Parks and Rec or 501c3. So we're just keeping that dialogue open. Anything you'd add, Anne? Okay.
Yeah. Great. Otherwise, I like the idea of adding green space, and I know that I've been to some of the lids in other cities, and you don't know, it's not clear that you're walking over a roadway, and that's a great opportunity. My biggest concern is I know that the Parks Department struggles with maintenance funding generally, and so maintaining a park is one thing, and maintaining what is a roadway structure is a very different thing, I think, for the department. So,
yep. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Katie. Hopefully we're not giving you too many questions here.
No.
We're really firing them at
I appreciate it. Fire away.
Okay. A lot of this has been covered, but I want to go way back to, can you tell us a little bit of what is the genesis of this idea? Where did it come from economic development and saying, hey, this is a way to do that? Where did it come from? Transportation or where?
I think the term LID first appeared in the 2016 transportation study for Grandview, which was before my time in working with the city. But I believe it was from that idea of we need to make this a more pedestrian, bicycle friendly. It talks about the potential of creating a LID, but doesn't go into detail about the LID itself. And then I think it's through a variety of different council members being involved and engaged in the economic development department at the city, exploring potential options. And the University of Minnesota Design Center has been very interested in this concept. And the architectural partner we worked with previously worked at the U of M Design Center. And so I think it was through a variety of connections. But ultimately, I think mostly driven by this excitement around the potential for what a green LID can do for a community. And then thinking about once the LID is in place, what new opportunity that presents as far as public land that is freed up and available that currently is not available today as a mechanism to help cover some of those costs for the public investment. So,
yeah, no, I think the idea itself, very intriguing. It does raise all kinds of ownership, revenue sharing. I mean, you're creating new space, new land. You're creating new tax revenue. You're somewhat debilitating the land underneath to some extent. There's going to be some loss of value, I'd think. As the land above is going to have more enhanced value and new value. But like you said, that can be discussed. What are we thinking for? We had talked about that whole space being looked at for a community center and some more public development as well as private development. Do we have a 40, 60, 40 or something split that we're looking at that we think makes sense, or is that not something we're talking about? Is there a design idea?
We're not there yet. So this next phase of technical studies will give us more information adding on to the feasibility study of what is possible. But then I think that would come in the next phase after technical studies of starting to get into a more detailed design phase.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had talked about it a couple of years ago, just for a design schematic. It might look kind of neat to have some kind of I don't know if you want to call it a mall, but you have a community center on one end, and you have the city hall at the other end, and you have some other quasi-government things going on, and they aesthetically look similar, and they're same materials. That might look pretty neat, like the Washington Mall, right? Something that's not going to be as grand, of course, but something like that would be pretty neat. And I'm not sure if that's what we're still talking about here, but just thought I would mention that.
Yeah.
And is there any perceived revenue gain? Sometimes when we do this, we've talked about the parks get some taxation and some revenue from this. Is that going to be a component of this? Is that being talked about? Because that would certainly allow us to have a role and really take a look at how the vision from a park perspective would really maintain itself. Right?
It
So,
could.
yeah.
Yeah.
So is there some talk like that, or is that?
We haven't, and Anne, feel free to jump in. We haven't gotten deep into the funding financing model yet, but there's potential for that.
Yeah, I think that would be a very logical expectation.
And your comment about the Washington Mall, real briefly, I'll just mention through the Urban Land Institute Technical Assistance Panel, one of the feedback pieces that we received is we need to create an identity, a vision for this space. So we know we have 50th in France, we have Southdale, we have other important areas in our community. You know, is this our Central Park? Is this a campus sort of feel where you can sit and read a book? What is that vision? And so they started kind of along those same lines as what you're thinking.
And I think, you know, I don't know if we have something, if we're going to wait for some public feedback to maybe generate some neat ideas for that. But it's a lot easier to raise money and raise interest. We've talked about having a nonprofit, endowment fund for the parks and that kind of thing. It's a lot easier to generate some interest and cash flow when there's an idea behind it, and not just a generality of we don't really know, but we think it's going to be great, as opposed to we know what it's going to be, and then you get people behind it. You know, so
yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Would you like to join my fundraising host committee?
We'll talk later.
All right, I'll try to come up with some original ideas. I second everything I think that I've heard thus far. One of the a couple of comments I'll start with first. So I think Member Nelson talked about the traffic. I think there's a lot of sensitivity right now with the construction of 169, and then it got rerouted through the city and stuff like that. And we had to work with MnDOT to kind of decrease or make that not a available option for those community members. And I think so this is also traffic today. I think during construction is a piece of that, and then it's also after. And then the other question I have is tied to traffic. So if you go farther south down Highway 100 and there's Benton Avenue right there, I think part of the reason why you see the traffic you do now at Vernon is that Highway 100 is not accessible going north from the south. From
Benton.
Yeah. So you can only exit onto it. So if that had exits going both ways, is that an opportunity? I know it's close to 62, and I'm not a civil engineer, but it's just something also to consider in this project. The other one is, and it's the elephant in the room, especially for this group. If you're talking park space, are you going to be talking about fields at all? And by fields, I mean not just open green space, like stuff that's schedulable for students or athletes or activities. Is it lit? Is it going to be striped for certain sports, those type of things? There's a lot of acreage here, 2 to 3 acres within, right in the heart of the community. Is there an opportunity to put something there that's the prime thing for kids to be able to play on or something like that? So just more of a comment than a question at this point. And then the other comment I had was, be interested to find out what you've experiences or I think private funds, we've talked about that here, something that's beyond sponsorship. So, if you're looking at, and Member Goods is correct too, I'm a little scared when I see all those buildings, but is there a partnership with some sort of private firm to be able to be part of that construction, and do we get to take some of that and put that back into the community, or however whatever rev share you come up with? So those are my comments. I know that this is a rendering, but I do know that there's a couple of if I'm looking at the screen that you have up right now, there's a couple of I guess businesses that would be moved potentially. If I'm looking at this, like Perkins, and then there's Tupa Park right there. What have you, in the past, if we look at the one that you showed us in Duluth or the one in Longfellow, is that part of this budget, if you have to move them or they have to rebuild because the grading changes or those type of things? I'm interested to hear the answer to that. And then the other question I had is, in this community, are there other proposed lids, not Edina specifically, but the Twin Cities? Because it seems like, as everyone else has said, it seems like in concept, it seems really, as long as it's feasible, it seems like it's a really good thing. I'd just be interested to find out, are we the guinea pigs, or are we just part of the growing number of communities that are considering this? So we are leading the way, is the way that I would describe it.
we're working with MnDOT very closely because we're one of the first communities that's actually putting together a plan and thinking through this and seriously considering it. There's a nonprofit that's formed in St. Paul, Reconnect Rondo, focused on a lid over Highway 100. Community was extremely divided, or I'm not Highway 100, I-94, when the interstate was put in place. They've done some great community organizing, but they're just starting to talk to the city. So we are openly sharing our plans and what we're learning with them as a way to help each other through this process. And MnDOT is involved in that partnership as well. There's been discussions of a potential lid between downtown and uptown through the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. There's, to my knowledge, no development path at the moment, but that's been something that's been talked about for at least a few years. So we are leading the way. If we can figure this out, if we can create this roadmap, everything from construction to funding, financing to programs, uses, purpose for the community, we will be creating a roadmap for other communities in the Twin Cities to also explore. And the topography, the natural topography of this land very much makes it easier to build a lid in this space. There are other parts of Edina that have that natural topography where other lids could be possible. And of course, other communities in the Twin Cities and the state that have that natural topography. So yes, in a way, we're the guinea pig, but I like to think of it as leading the charge and considering a new space, new innovative way to create green space for communities. As far as moving developments, yeah, we're not in conversation with Perkins today. This is very initial planning. The Tupa Park has 2 historic buildings, but those are not at their original location. So could potentially be moved. Unsure as to if this project would pay for that or if it comes from another budget. And I'm not able to answer that today. But as we get deeper into exploring the potential here, those are things we'll have to look into. Yeah.
Oh, you're done? Yeah. I thought of one further question because when we're talking about return on investment and $100 billion additional to the tax rolls, as it's conceived right now, what are you looking at for that? Is that some residential and some business? And how does that break out just conceptually right now when you come up with those numbers percentage-wise?
So the economic analysis was done by Jones Lang LaSalle. And they took these architectural plans and put numbers to them. So it's based on a mix of residential, commercial space, as well as... And
commercial meaning retail or meaning more corporate, commercial?
A mix. And then also considering the cost of these roadway upgrades would be about $25 million. Whether that's paid for by public monies or private development, unsure. But that return on investment was based on a $37 million public investment. So that was based on the city paying for $25 million in roadway upgrades or some sort of public partnership. And then also paying for the lid itself. But not getting involved in district parking. So it gives us one analysis to think about. Those numbers will change, and they're very initial numbers.
Is it seem more, there'll be some discussion as a pinch point between cost and revenue garnered hits it, and is it more cost advantageous for us or revenue advantageous to us to have residential versus retail versus more of a or higher end corporate on the, business on the tax rolls, or what's better for this community in general? Can you answer that?
I can't answer that today, but that's something that we will continue looking into with that mix. It's also based on square footage, right? So some of these buildings, you'll see in the rendering, the architect was thinking at most, 5-6 story buildings. The community may decide that's too tall for this area, or they may decide they're comfortable with that. So it also depends on exactly what's built in that space and what type of revenue that generates.
Yeah, and then what the I guess the return for the contractor, right? They have to look at it, because you're familiar with the Estelle proposal, right? And so I'm looking at that this might be a better location for the Estelle if we plan to have other size buildings that can kind of ramp up to it, because the complaint in the neighborhood, and I live in the Cornelia Lake neighborhood, is you can't have a 20-some story building that's next to a single story house.
Right.
You need to, like downtowns, they ramp up and they ramp down.
Yep.
So it doesn't work.
Right.
But in this situation, it might, right? So if there's some residential, and there's really pretty residential, it's really high end. I love it, but it just doesn't fit there. But it might fit here. So that's kind of that's where I'm getting at. But.
I lied, I wasn't done. Jumping off of what Member Giske said too, let's say you get the groundswell from the community to do a lid. Do you have other places within Edina city limits where like the backup plan could be? I can think of a couple off the top of my head. Again, not an engineer, but I mean, I think you're going to get a good amount of support. There'll be a lot of questions. I'm just wondering if we would lose out on the opportunity if we didn't have another place that we could put something like this.
I know the architectural firm that worked on these renderings does have a few ideas of where lids could go in the city of Edina, where else they could be located. We're not exploring those at the moment. We don't have feasibility studies on what that would look like in that area. At the moment, our focus is here, but we'll see how this develops.
Katie, can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Can you help me understand on the communication? I know this is all a draft, and right now you're evangelizing with the other commissions, but I am a neighbor, so I do have some angst, and I'm thinking about this north east side, and as many people have mentioned already, like getting neighbor feedback early and often is really important.
Yep.
And if this comes out just in this meeting, people are going to ask, so what is your communication or sharing out plans for just even telling that this is a consideration and getting feedback from the surrounding neighbors?
Yep. So my goal is to reach the commissions first, just so you all had a first glance and would be able to respond to any community questions that you're receiving. And then in October, November, take it out to the community. So far we're scheduled to present to the Edina Chamber, both of the Edina Rotary organizations, meeting with the superintendent of schools, and then we're going to host probably 3 neighborhood meetings. I'm currently in contact with the Edina communications staff to put together posters, marketing campaign, some sort of social media presence where we can help get the word out for those meetings, and then select dates and actually invite everyone in to those meetings. So this is very much, initial stages of the project and gathering feedback early on. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I welcome any feedback you have on neighborhood engagement and ways we can really help get the word out.
I think the more that we can not come in with the approach that we already have something baked, the more that it's just coming up with here's an idea that we're talking about, and that nothing's baked in. The more that people see pictures, the more people think it's done, even when you say it's a draft, because obviously this takes time to create. You didn't just draw this on the back of a napkin, so people feel like it's already baked, and then that just makes people, they get really defensive really quickly, and it spirals. So I think that the more that we can get in there early and often, so they aren't hearing it from us, and if I'm across the street and this is my back door, and I'm going to have basically a college campus across the street, and I haven't heard about it, the first time I hear it, and it sounds like it feels like it's baked, I think that you get people's walls up pretty quickly. So the more that we can give some form of, hey, we're just even having conversations, we're going to give you feedback coming up in October and November, the more that, that would be my feedback, the more that we can share it, because otherwise, I think about some of the projects we've been pushing back on, like Arden, for example, for months and months. I think the more that we can just share out early and often, even if it's preliminary, the better.
Thank you. Yeah, and that is our intent. I know some of these pictures look like it's further along, but this was a part of our feasibility study work, was to explore what is the potential of that space. So very much still in those initial phases and getting input early on.
Okay, good. So I'd just like to see if our new student members have any comments. So Brendan or Ava?
Sure, yeah, I have a question. I believe earlier you spoke of increased parking. Is that correct? So where on the drawings would that take place, or how much of the lid would that take up that could be used for other things? Like just where on the drawings? Because I don't see it on this one right here.
Yeah, so you don't see it because it's underground.
Okay.
So there's a few potential options and many different ways, frankly, that parking could be done. One of the thoughts is shown here on this graph, where parking is directly, underneath the lid, but right next to where the cars are going through on Highway 100. Another option is beneath development that happens in these parcels. There could be underground parking in the district. The initial economic analysis was based on around 2,500 new parking spots. Just to get a sense, put some numbers to it and try to understand what's possible. But it could be in a variety of places.
Okay, and then just during the building of this, if it does happen, how much would it affect the traffic on Highway 100? Like, would there have to be a full-out closure of it, or for how long, or how would that affect the regular traffic flow on 100? Excellent
questions for your first Park Board Commission meeting. I think that future in public policy is ahead of you. So we would, the lid could be constructed with minimal interruption to Highway 100. It could be nighttime closure only. And there's a few different ways that it could be engineered and constructed. So in between the two, southbound, northbound, you see that orange line in between. That could be a full wall, or it could be pillars with some open space in between. So as we get further along in exploring cost and engineering, and we'll get a better sense of what that could look like. But it can be constructed without halting traffic and minimal nighttime closure.
Thank you.
So you mentioned putting real estate or retail below the apartments. How would that affect 50th and France and all the shops in Vernon? Would there be competing stores, and would some potentially go out of business due to this?
Yeah, another really good question. When we're thinking about what is the identity for the Grandview district, that's something that we're taking into consideration. We definitely would not want to pull business away from the 50th and France area or Southdale area. And so we need to think about what is the identity of this space, what is the best community use of this space. If there is retail, is it somehow different than what retail we have currently in 50th and France or Southdale? Or is this more of a Central Park community programming space that's more residential? So it really is a wide open book today as far as what may end up in this space, but that is something that we'll be thinking about and being very careful that we're allowing each of these districts to thrive.
And then also, because it's cutting right across 50th, how would that impact the traffic on that for the neighborhoods and all the people that live around there?
So this next round of technical studies that we're doing will dive deeper into if there is housing in this space and density increases, what impact does that have to local neighborhood traffic as well as Highway 100 traffic? So we'll get different traffic counts, better understand what that looks like, and that will help shape our vision for what's possible in this space and what makes sense for our community in this space. Good questions. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Yeah. Very good questions, I think very thoughtful, questions from everybody, and I appreciate all your time, Katie.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to head up to historic preservation and see what they have to say about it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the community comment. I don't believe we have anybody that wants to give a community comment, so we'll move on to our reports and recommendations. And the first item is the Braemar Park Master Plan update. Cancel.
So Ann, I might need some help getting... Oh. And that must be it.
You know what? You just hover.
There it is. Perfect. Okay. Okay. Good evening. My name is Ken Grieshaber with SRF, and it's been about 2 months since we've been back to the Park and Rec Commission to talk about Braemar Park. And so over the last couple months, we've been meeting with the community, listening to stakeholders, getting some online feedback about thoughts, ideas for Braemar Park in terms of developing a master plan. So I'll... Okay, we're not advancing. We seem to be locked. Spacebar, okay. Just a quick update on the schedule. Last week, actually, we had a great meeting with various city staff people to talk about Braemar Park, about some initial ideas and thoughts. Next week, we'll be meeting with the council and the community again just to talk about some preliminary ideas for their feedback. And then as we move forward into October, we'll be trying to formalize some recommendations to go back to the community and ultimately back to the Park and Rec Commission and Council in November or early December for approval. So that's kind of where we're headed right now in the process. I thought I'd quickly summarize some of the SurveyMonkey information. This was up for about a month on the website. And a lot of these things seem to dovetail not only on what was on Speak Up Edina, but SurveyMonkey and what we heard from the community. The whole issue about how do you currently use Braemar Park, no surprise. The golf course, the driving range were kind of the leaders with the arena. And then quite a bit of people sometimes frequently visit Tin Fish. And then that whole notion about trails, I think there are a lot of interest and active use of the existing trail system in the park. So that's where we started to dial in on some of our thoughts and ideas for trail circulation. Then we took that one step farther with 650 or so responses that we did receive. And no surprise, the whole notion of trying to increase or expand the summer walking, hiking trail opportunities in the park, which there are plenty of ways to pursue that. There's still plenty of interest in winter cross-country skiing, and that's probably most likely going to be focused on the golf course at this point, but I'll talk about that in a second. And then that was followed up with both summer and winter mountain biking. We had a lot of great representation for the mountain bike community at our last community meeting about mountain bike trails. The last question was about what types of new amenities people would like to see in the park. Once again, the bike and pedestrian circulation was head above everything else. A lot of other comments about wanting additional picnic tables, shelters, shade, those type of amenities, a playground facility, which was there at one time in the park, and I think there are some residents that are missing that. And the whole notion of improving signage and wayfinding, and then accessibility, which is a challenge in some areas of the park. So I think back in July, we did share this with everyone, some of our initial thoughts on how we were starting to think about the park, and we kind of broke these down into zones, into identifying preliminary issues and opportunities and some of the comments we were hearing from stakeholders. And so I'll just run through these quickly. Zone 1, which is primarily the Courtney Fields baseball complex, there are a lot of things to be addressed that the Baseball Association wanted us to look at. And a lot of those plans, I think, are are coming together with some of their initiatives, but the whole notion of potentially looking at a grandstand for Field 1, which I'll talk about in a second, but looking at the whole perimeter around the ball field complex, and are there other opportunities for just trying to create more programmable space that is currently just being used for the players for warm-up space. And jumping down to the building parking facilities, we did hear some comments about, we have a lot of different ranges of architecture throughout the park, and are there ways we can think about enhancing parking lot facilities and just the overall image of some of the building facilities, which I'll also get into in a second. Just a couple quick photos. Field 4, this is the short field. This is a great open lawn space that we thought would initially be a great space for playground facilities, but after talking to some of the folks, the issue about player warm-up space was kind of important. So we were starting to look at more of the west side of the athletic ball field complex near the maintenance facility. We think there are a lot of opportunities in and around the existing woodland, which is full of invasives at this point, but offer an opportunity for a conventional or a natural play experience. And then I think the whole notion of just the entry experience into Braemar from the frontage on 169 is kind of blah. We have a sea of parking. The arena, we heard comments about the arena is not very dynamic, welcoming, so we played with a few ideas with that. And then I know there is ongoing things going on with new signage, park signage in the city, and so this is one of the locations being identified for new park signage and wayfinding. And then as we looked at the parking lot facilities, this is basically up on the north end to Courtney. Right now Public Works is utilizing kind of the secondary entrance to get down to their maintenance facility and keeping their dumpsters and piling materials and so on. But we think there are opportunities to potentially even look at a accessible route down to the ball fields from this access. And I think this was kind of people's like factor in terms of what the new Braemar Field offers. It offers place for pedestrians to hang out before and after they have activities at the field house. So those are some of the things we were trying to think about. Zone 2 down in the southwest corner, after talking to Public Works, I think we think there aren't a lot of opportunities for park enhancements there based on all the conflicts with all the Public Works activities and service access. And so we initially looked at some ideas for trails there, but I think potentially too many conflicts to deal with there. So the only other thing.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
not trying. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just because I think we're in that section, and the section is more familiar to me more recently, and it's probably not a park question, but it's in the same realm. The frontage road there's not a sidewalk, so if you were to walk or run, and I have many times around that area, it's not safe. So you run up the terrible hill of the frontage road, and there's oncoming traffic a lot. Is there any plans of? It's very just like wooded and such.
Yes.
Is there any plans of making that?
As part of the city's bike and ped system plan, there is a state aid sidewalk that's being proposed on the east side of that frontage road.
Okay.
So that's all part of the current plan.
Perfect, because it does start and stop at then just right on that hill of the frontage road where it gets really dangerous is where it's not. So I'm just curious on that side.
Yes, and that's a very challenging space, especially for more trail development. But you're right, access is a real challenge along the frontage road, going north and south for bikes and peds.
Well, I just figured if there are kids who ever want to walk to any of these fields, it would be, I hope they don't currently.
Right, and we have some thoughts or ideas for how that, I think, can get improved here as part of the master plan.
Sorry to...
Nope, no, thanks for the question. So the only other opportunity, we think the existing parking lot, that's basically a trailhead now for the existing trail, still offers plenty of opportunity for a place to park and use the trail system. So as the trail heads south and then circulates south, heads south and circulates east towards the other natural resource area, we think there are a lot of opportunities just for reusing and potentially resurfacing this trail. So the biggest challenge I think we're faced with is how we really try to establish this south connector from east to west in the park. And I think we've found an opportunity or way to do that. We also are looking at the golf course and the clubhouse area and how that could be improved for accessibility and other types of public programming. And then the other thing about natural resource interpretation I'll talk about in a second here. But the whole idea of trying to get a continuous loop around the park up to Braemar Boulevard, Hillary Lane is kind of where we were focused. And then utilizing the existing bridges in place from a permitting perspective is kind of where we were trying to work or focus our efforts. This is the existing plastic boardwalk that provides access to the private properties to the south of the park. And this has been here a while, and I think it's been subjected to, once this area does flood, the decks have holes in them and they get kind of squishy and wet, and so for users it's not a very great experience walking on for wet conditions. And then just looking at some of the areas on the east side of the park with trail connections to the neighborhood, we think there are a lot of opportunities to improve those so we don't have a lot of erosion potential or that's currently occurring in the park. And then rounding up into Zone 5, we think opportunities for the Academy 9 are probably not that extensive for new park amenities based on the prairie restoration work that's currently going on there. And then this whole Zone 5 on the north end is a wetland, woodland area, and it's also very close to the neighbors. So I think we decided there weren't a lot of great opportunities for improving a trail there. But along Hillary Lane, Braemar Boulevard, the notion of creating more of a parkway feel to that street was something we gravitated towards. We do have a great separated trail basically extending up right about where the pedestrian bridge crosses into the Academy 9 into the golf course, but we think there are opportunities to continue a great separated trail, which we heard from the public is kind of a dangerous situation the way it is right now. So you can see kind of the prairie restoration work going on at Academy 9, and you know, just for small rainfall events, that north area gets fairly flooded fairly quickly. So just looking at, this is Braemar Boulevard, right next to the dome. We've heard a lot of things about how this is kind of functioning as an overflow parking area, but the roadway varies in width probably anywhere from 30 to 32 feet. And so one of the thoughts is that we could look at narrowing the road potentially down to like 26 feet to give us a little more room, which is the state aid standard, and then look at trying to get some ped and bike accommodations on the south side of the road. As you move farther along, more opportunities, but also more constraints. There's wetlands that start to infringe very close to the road, but there's always ways to work around some of that. But we recognize stormwater infrastructure and so on, especially when we get into curbing, will be a challenge to get that through. So how we started, we basically developed kind of a palette of trail systems that we thought would be appropriate for the park. This first one graphic is showing the notion of a curbed parkway with basically a 10-foot wide trail for bikes and peds. The whole notion of creating an identity for the parkway, for the park, seemed like a good idea to think about. Whether we get into decorative lighting and that kind of thing would be something else to look at. And then existing paved trail, we think there are opportunities to develop a paved trail around the Courtney Fields ball field complex. Operations folks thought maybe that should be wider, up to 8 feet, and that's something to consider for their needs. And then the soft surface trail, there are ways you can surface the trail to be accessible with a Class 2 type of aggregate for wheelchair users as well as the strollers and so on. And then, of course, the single track mountain bike trail system, which for the most part would stay between 1 and 2 feet with some potential grading impacts up and down slope if we're dealing with slope issues. So we've developed two concepts we'd like to share with the community next week.
Ken, excuse me,
yes.
you go back one. Does a single track mountain bike trail imply that it would be leisure use and not competitive use?
Yes, I think that's the case. Now I know Edina High School would like to use it as a training ground. Yep. And the next level of detail, I think, for development of the mountain bike trail system plan is really to assess what type of features we really want to include on the trail. You know, there's obstacles, there's challenges, or it can be more of a recreational trail system. So working with Tim Wegner at Trail Source, he'd like to delve into another level of detail to look at, you know, easy, intermediate, advanced type trails. That would be all inherently part of that for recreational and maybe more advanced users.
Okay.
So the first concept we looked at was really trying to look at what the land resource would offer us for trail development. And the two areas are on the east and the west sides of the park. And so Tim laid out kind of a preliminary trail system here that would primarily be served from Hillary Lane. And then you would, we have identified kind of the existing parking lot as a trailhead parking lot with the notion or understanding there would be potentially overflow that would be accommodated maybe on the south end of the existing golf course parking lot. But this idea is also advocating for the trail system continuing off to the west. And all these trail systems would loop back on each other. So if somebody wants to do this loop, they can keep doing that loop, come over here and do this loop, and then once again do that here. They're all a one-way trail system with the exception of a couple segments to allow people to get back to where they started. So in this concept, you know, we have roughly about 6 miles of mountain bike trail, and that's kind of what Mork kind of gave us as an ideal target, that 10K, I think we're just short of 6 miles to try to integrate into the park. And then we still have the community trail that basically is the soft surface walking trail that basically parallels the mountain bike trail, but then is kind of the buffer between the golf course and the cart pass and the mountain bike trail system. So we're looking at trying to establish a 15 to 20 foot buffer with the community trail, then the mountain bike trail even more than that, with the exception of a couple areas over on the west side. So the other thing we're looking at is extending that trail all the way up to that's Valley View Road, and potentially making the connection back here into either you could go over to the ball field area, or you could cross and follow a soft surface trail to get you back and continue your loop back to if you're in the parking lot here, or continue around again. So that's roughly about, when you look at pedestrian versus mountain bike trails, it's about 6 mountain and 4 pedestrian trails. And this is kind of the detail of that. And I probably don't have much more to say. I apologize for the difficulty trying to read some of the graphics here. The next, and this is just a kind of enlargement of the detail of the south connector. The dark yellow line represents existing trail that's currently in place. So there is an existing access here that was providing access for the golf course and I think the porta potty for the old course. And so we'd like to utilize those 2 trail segments. And then there's an existing old golf course bridge that we'd also utilize. And then as part of the golf course construction, there's an existing bridge here that's being removed that we'd like to relocate to another creek crossing on 9 Mile, which would also have boardwalk approaches on either side. And then the big one we need is where all the wetland restoration work is going as part of the golf course, which is roughly about 500 feet of boardwalk that would be required to get across that wetland area. So concept B, we tried to put a focus more on developing trails on the east side of the park with a little higher intensity of use. Tim Wegner thinks there's plenty of opportunities for this to work, not only from a grading, but just from a functional perspective. And then the idea that we just keep the mountain bike activity on the east side of the park and then try to further develop more of the pedestrian soft surface trail system on the west side. So this kind of flip-flops the percentages. We have about 6 miles now of pedestrian trail versus 4 mountain bike trail. And so the whole notion of trying to use these oak savanna woodland areas as more of a natural resource restoration interpretation area, the idea that we could create maybe a small little overlook, one of the high points down in the south end of the park, potentially a boardwalk overlook down in the wetland down by 9 Mile Creek. And then this would also connect to the same system along Braemar Boulevard. And then as part of this concept, we also were advocating for putting at least a 6-foot sidewalk along the south side of Braemar Boulevard to connect all the way to 169, which kind of gets to your point, I think, about trying to create better pedestrian connections for people to get to the park. And the light blue line does represent either on-road bike lanes or planned future sidewalks. So I might want to take a pause there. Does anybody have any questions about the 2 ideas that we'd like to share with the community next week?
I just had a clarification on concept A. Did you also have the sidewalk that you just mentioned?
So in
No,
concept
okay.
A, we were, excuse me. So we were advocating for that walk to basically stop at Valley View Road with the idea that they would cross. This would be a crosswalk or potentially a stop condition. And then they would be able to walk on the soft surface trail on the west side of the road to connect. So the hard surface trail would only go to Valley View Road and then connect to the existing hard surface trail system that would connect around the ball fields and then out into the parking area. Yes, that's where that's being proposed. Now, there could be some question. There could be a thing here where you have bike and sidewalk accommodations, which is kind of being shown in that section that we developed, and then maybe it's only a 6-foot sidewalk, which is kind of what we're showing. But then I think that the notion for having a bike lane would also be important because there is a bike lane along the frontage, which gets challenging, I think, as you move up to the interchange up here. But I think the whole idea of trying to improve the connectivity of having both a sidewalk and bike accommodation would be a nice thing to have along that stretch, even though there are plenty of challenges to try to get it in there.
Okay, good. Thanks for the clarification. And Corin, where was the area that you were concerned about? Just
particularly it's in the bottom left-hand corner of the map where there's several issues, and you could see them where you said people park on the side, and if you're trying to run and there's parking and people. But the part I feel like is the most dangerous is where it turns into a frontage road. On the south, you turn the corner, and there's a frontage road for 169, and it goes up a hill. So on this bottom left-hand corner.
Down here.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
okay, good. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay.
So I'm just catching up, missed a couple meetings, so I just want to ask this question, and I'm sure it's already been discussed, but why is there a golf practice hole? And why is that not being thought of as I looked through the notes of the meetings that you had, and I'm showing my true colors, I know that, but why is that not being given back to the soccer club or to the soccer association for a soccer field, which it was up until that hole was built in 1992?
I think I'd like to address that.
Okay.
After we had some of our initial meetings, our golf course staff approached us and talked to us about wanting to maintain that as a golf practice hole. We're going to be doing some significant changes in our golf lesson program over the next year, and as we open the new golf course, we already have the best lesson program in the state. We intend to continue to expand that program. And one of the things that would really set us above everybody else is the ability to have a golf practice hole for private lessons. So it's being very heavily used today for that, and it has continued to be very popular. So that's something that that our golf enterprise wanted to retain. If the park board feels very strongly in a different direction, we could certainly consider that. But I think one of the things that we do need to consider is that we need to do anything that we can to continue to bolster the golf enterprise first. We don't want to do anything that's going to detract from golf. And to be perfectly honest, this is just my opinion, and my opinion isn't probably even the most important here, but I think that there would be probably a pretty significant conflict to have a major soccer facility immediately adjacent to the golf course. Again, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to figure out who or how we could do a study to find out. So since they're associations, so you've got flag football that's growing, you've got soccer that's growing, you've got all of these places, and some of those associations are turning away signups right now. I'd love to be able to see what the financial impact if we were able to provide more opportunities for more schedulable space in light of the recommendation that the Park Commission made for Fred again, been gone for a couple meetings, so I've got some pent up thoughts, I think. But I think I'd be interested to find out, especially in light of the fact that we just did a multi-million-dollar driving range, redo, and I'm not trying to take away from the golfers. I get that, but part of the reason why, if I'm not mistaken, is that we went from 27 holes to 18 is that we're seeing that golf as a sport is probably peaked and is now coming back in terms of the number of people that are doing it. I know that we have youth lessons and adult lessons and stuff like that, but and I don't want to get stuck on this one point, but I'd like us to, you've got two concepts. It's the same thing here, and I guess I talk to the same folks and I hear the same comments, and so it seems that those things that we have 20 kids per team, and that's a lot of people from the community that could be served, as opposed to a couple of people that are working on their wedges on the golf hole. So that's my thought.
So, and I'm sorry that I don't know much about golf, but my kids did do lessons all through the summer there. I did see you there once when I was doing my workout in the parking lot. But no one ever in all we were there for the league or the lessons went over in that area. They usually use there's a practice hole also off, or just a putting green area. That's different than this, right?
Yes. Yes, that is different.
Because this area is over here. Okay.
Yep.
Because I wasn't sure in terms of the way, if it's used a lot from the lessons perspective, because my kids never went over in that section, so I was just curious. It is different than the putting green area.
It is, definitely, yes. And it certainly could be used from a group lesson perspective. As I mentioned, we're going to be making some changes in our lesson program in the next year, but certainly would be heavily used from a private lesson standpoint.
And Matt, I might counter that little area, if it is bringing in organized sports, to get to parking, to go to the parking area, the regular parking lot, it's quite a hike back down in there. And so I'd worry about people just parking up and down the street just so they could get to the field quicker. And then also the idea of lights again too, if it's getting close to those people on Gleason, could be a concern. But you know this too. I'm curious because I think you probably played there. To me, it's quite an elevation change. How was it a field back then?
So that lake there didn't exist. So that was a drain when they put in the new 9, the Clooney 9. That drainage area there was then built. Not to say that area wasn't swampy. It was a little bit lower elevation, but they put that in. I think there's a fountain, or there used to be a fountain in there. The mountain bike hiking trailhead parking lot was the parking. There was just one field there. I don't even know if it was regulation size at the time, but there was a field there. And actually, in the wintertime, for us delinquents, that was the runoff from the toboggan hill that started at the top of the hill and was like a single track mountain bike sized wide cut out through the trees, and then you would run out on that soccer field once the snow flew. So you know, I guess I'm not trying to be nostalgic, and I'm trying to think, I guess, larger picture as we've over the last year and a half, or the time that I've been on the commission here. We've talked about Arden, and there's a green space, and we talked about Fred Richards, and even though I wasn't here, I was watching. We talked about a green space, no lights, no schedulable opportunities, or that's the recommendation we made, and I don't know if the City Hall still has to vote on that, or City Council still has to vote on that. So I see the opportunity shrinking dramatically, and I see our community is growing, and I see the number of children that can do any of these activities. And I love the fact that we have so many different activities in this whole plan: biking, you know, assuming snowshoeing in the winter, all of those different things. I'm not just, but when I look at a field that could have 20-some kids playing on it, be it soccer, lacrosse, flag football, whatever that is, and I know the logistics aren't exactly ideal from a parking perspective, but I get passionate about the idea that we might be missing out on something that, you know, a lot of different of the associations could potentially benefit from. and I'm not belittling golf. I got hip surgery so I could play golf. So I'm just curious if we have an opportunity to do a study and figure that out. So,
Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we did go ahead and say on Fred Richards that we would do fields and we would do schedulable, but we had to figure out who exactly was going to be in the building, in the commercial space, to make sure that we had parking, because that's what I took away, right? That we said that we would do, based on whoever that is, as long as we didn't for sure have parking, that we would use that as schedulable fields based on that.
The field was approved as an open field. Decisions on scheduling and lighting was deferred until we knew what was happening to the buildings in the south.
Yeah, and the perception from those potentially associations, football, lacrosse, soccer, the perception is, just from my straw poll of like 3 people that are on those associations, is that is not going to be scheduled. It's not going to be lit. It's going to be an open field. And that was the recommendation from the commission. And that's also the recommendation, or at least the conversation that they've had with various city council people. So so that's what I would throw out there.
What we did is exactly how Corin mentioned it, or Greg mentioned too. We deferred it until we had better understanding. So hopefully that didn't come across. We can't influence the council on what they want to do. So I felt like we were pretty clear that we were concerned about the parking for the neighbors. But given that was reasonable with the new development, that we expected it to be scheduled, and the lighting was kind of up in the air, right? So, make that clear now, at least.
Okay, should we continue on here? So just quickly just showing some of the type of skill challenges that could be considered for the mountain bike trail system. We were originally playing with the idea of trying to do more of a skills course like they have down at Lebanon Hills in Dakota County, but we just couldn't find the land area to accommodate that. But the notion of trying to create, just working with terrain, Tim Wegner thinks there's a lot of great opportunities all over the park for creating just really fun, not only with embankment turns, but rollers and all different type of skill challenges. And some of that, we'd have to find the balance between how much we do of that versus just recreational trails. But that's kind of, like I said, the next level of detail to look into here. And then in terms of the trail, obviously a boardwalk system with just rub rails on the side. We might want to look at a way to try to create some other type of demarcation in the middle if we are going to program that for both bike peds, walkers with dogs, with mountain bikes, if that concept materializes. But there are ways to probably address that or deal with that in terms of a boardwalk crossing. This is just a example of a wetland overlook that we'd love to try to integrate somewhere down in the 9 Mile Creek watershed. And then we were looking at the idea on that high point of creating a small little shelter with some picnic tables as just kind of an informal little picnic area on top of the point on the west side of the park.
Hey, I got a question about the boardwalks.
Yes.
I'm just curious from a parks maintenance perspective, when you start putting these in, and I know that we've looked at the stuff around Methodist Hospital and stuff like that. And I think it's really cool. I just wondered what kind of not the right word, but what kind of expectations in terms of maintenance are there on the materials? And then do we have enough staff to maintain those, especially if you're looking at some longer, hundreds yards of
Right.
boardwalk?
Right, and there's a multitude of different types of boardwalk systems out there. Tim Wegner from Trail Source, I know, talked about a lot of wood boardwalks they have built that have been in place for 25 years. There are a lot of new other materials out there now with gridded materials that are more of a poly, like recycled material that you can look. The aesthetic of it is probably not as nice as wood. But I think there are a lot of cost variables in how you structurally support the boardwalk. Right now, the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District has a mandate that has to be 2 feet above the OHW, the high water mark of the wetland, to allow for water flow, since 9 Mile Creek is channeling a lot of water. So there's a lot of things we'd have to think about structurally how we'd support it, but cost variables, and we'll be getting into that about not only the initial cost, but what you need to do to maintain those. So I know the city is currently working on their new signage, and one of the things that we'd really like to do is try to enhance not only the signage for the park, but also wayfinding to the different facilities. And we've kind of identified with these yellow circles kind of the prime areas to the east and to the west from the frontage and from Hillary Lane, and then at Valley View on this corner. We also look, there is an existing, it's really a pedestrian connection that kind of circumnavigates through to get to the park through a private parcel. And from a bike trail connection perspective, this Bush Lake Road trail does extend and connect to Highland Park and so on. But I think if we were going to advocate for anything, it would be trying to improve the pedestrian connection from this intersection into the park. And there are inherently a lot of challenges for doing that with grading and more wetland issues. So I think there might be other ways to think about access to that, and one of those is being identified right over here on the back of this private parcel. So there's more plans evolving, I think, for the signage system for Braemar.
So before we leave that, Ken, and maybe this is just more a point for us as a park team, but I'm looking at that signage on the west side, in theory, for Braemar Arena. And I'm guessing from many years of approaching Braemar Arena that 80 to 90% of the people entering would never see that sign where it's being positioned, because they're either coming through the park and into the parking lot, or they're coming from 169, and there are two other entrances to get into Braemar Arena. So at least if we truly put that sign on kind of that corner that we've got there, I'm not sure that it would be seen much. So just something maybe for us to think about.
Susan, would you maybe talk just real quickly about what you were thinking for signs in that area, or do you want me to?
Which area, Greg, were you
The
talking
west
about?
side, the entrance into what would be the wayfinding, and yeah, right there where Ken's noting, and into Braemar, that nobody really comes into that area for Braemar. They go directly into the parking lot.
So that's the area south of the actual building,
That's
right?
correct,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I think people on that frontage road, we are thinking of possibly putting a wayfinding sign there that has some like directions to the golf dome, from that direction to the golf course, and then kind of have it again a two-face sign. So when you're coming from the opposite direction, directing you in the same way.
I think, Greg, that frontage road now connects up. There's a roundabout going south a bit, right? And there's some businesses along 78th Street, some of them along the south side of Braemar.
So potentially
So
we
there
may
is
have
a little
more
bit of
people
traffic,
coming
a little
up that
trickle, not a
direction,
lot,
right?
but there's
Yeah.
some. You know, yeah.
Future, it might grow.
Maybe. Yeah.
I think a couple other things worth noting there too. As Susan mentioned, that is intended to be a wayfinding sign specifically to the golf course.
That would be useful, absolutely.
Yep. We currently have a sign posted on a light post there. The enterprise facility signs are not included as part of the park signage project, so certainly understand that we could improve a Braemar Arena sign there, but we're also a little bit farther north of the entrance to the arena. We're proposing a sign for Courtney Field and Braemar Field.
Okay.
And then just to the north of that, right where Ken is pointing right now, we're also planning to replace that main wayfinding sign that's there.
All right, good, thanks.
So the other thing on signs, I think with the trail system, there needs to be wayfinding signs there.
Yes.
Is that already considered as part of the trail?
Yeah, so we'll have some different additional information about trail wayfinding signage to include as part of the master plan recommendations, but yes.
Sorry, don't mean to jump around. Talking about Braemar Field, is there any plans in this, or was there plans at some point and still yet to be completed to put in, and I don't know what the right term is, but traffic controls? I mean, when you pull into that west access point between where just past the fields on your way to Braemar Field, that's just a vast area of tar, and it's interesting to watch the collisions between the parents running to 3-on-3 at velocity and the parents running to the soccer fields and the baseball fields. So I was just wondering if they ever thought about putting in like islands with lights and stuff to kind of create traffic and where you should park. Is that part of this in here, or would it be?
Yeah, we have some things to share about when we're talking about more sustainable way to maintain your parking lots. Some of those could be defining parking bays with permeable pavers. You have a pretty good soil medium here to do that. There'd have to be some other issues with drain tile and how you connect to stormwater system, but that'd be one way to clearly demarcate parking bays and not lose parking. Because I know parking is a premium here, and so we have a couple other things about how you could improve maybe that secondary entrance down by the maintenance facility, to create more of a turnaround for a drop-off area and so on, which I'll share in a second here. So one of the other things we did look at, and some of this is based on kind of the winter recreation study that was completed last fall, but we have, when the snow conditions do allow, when we have, hopefully we get heavy snow sometime in our upcoming winters, but there's about a 4-mile ski trail system we've laid out that's based very closely to one that was worked on last fall, where we'd have kind of these two connecting 2-mile loops that would circulate back to the clubhouse building for a warming room facility. Oh, excuse me, over here. So that's subject to more refinement and study, I think, with city staff, but we'd like to really show the community that we would like to try to accommodate ski trails on the golf course when snow conditions warrant that. And so one other thing we started to look at related to parking lots was kind of how the whole function of the existing parking lot at the golf course, and so as you come in off John Harris Drive, there's, we have the signage about directing loading and drop off, and or you can come this way into the parking lot. And so we thought there may be potentially ways to simplify this a little bit with all the roadway circulation and remove kind of this little planting buffer that's kind of more of a barrier between people getting out of their cars and then crossing and getting into either going to the driving range or the Academy 9 building. And the other big issue is accessibility. Right now, this approach, both the walk and the drive, is way over 5% to get people up and down, as well as this walk approach. There's basically no accessible way to get to Tin Fish and the old clubhouse facility. So we looked at quickly the idea of potentially creating a turnaround that would be pushed farther to the north, and we'd have to build up the grade slightly here to accommodate this, but we've eliminated the double drive here. So as you come in, you just basically come down the main aisle. There's potentially a drop off to the Academy 9 building, but then we have this graded out in such a way where you have a 5% grade all the way to here. The biggest disadvantage is you have probably about a 60 to 70 foot walk from the drop off zone to get to Tin Fish, which now is like 10 feet. But anything under 100 feet is probably acceptable. But the whole idea of this concept was not only accessibility, but just trying to create a better sense of entry to the golf course with, flagpole plazas. And the other thing this is trying to accomplish is having a separate drive for loading service access. So instead of having all the loading coming up with the public, there'd be like a surmountable curb on the sidewalk, which would allow people, a service vehicle, to pull in and then exit out. So as part of the other public improvements, or try to find opportunities to get more people or for the public to come. We have the lawn court area, which didn't come across very well in this slide, but that's basically in this area. And then we are looking at the idea, we heard the notion of platform tennis, which is more of a raised deck type of tennis that they heat underneath the court for winter play. So we think there's an opportunity to shelve in 4 courts, walk connection back to the clubhouse, Tin Fish, and then in terms of the parking, we'd also maybe look at the idea of trying to do something more with stormwater, which currently all sheets down to the east with permeable paving parking bays as a way to make it just more sustainable as part of kind of the overall golf course thing with the Autobot certified golf course. So that's just, and then we still allow for the tee boxes to remain. I think there's one that gets eliminated because of the platform tennis, but we'd still allow for that to stay basically how it currently is being used. So any questions about that? And then jumping to Courtney, the biggest challenge is accessibility. We have almost, it's 25 to 30 feet of grade differential from the parking lot down to the fields, which doesn't, both these walk approaches, the main one as well as the secondary, do not provide accessible access. So one of the things we start to look at just from a grading perspective, the whole notion of trying to create a turnaround, something that would make this more of a defined entry, and then potentially creating a wider, this would probably have to be about 10 feet wide to still accommodate maintenance vehicles, but then the notion of creating a 6 to 8 foot wide perimeter trail around the ball field complex would, I think, allow for more activity for parents that have kids. You have the spectator area, embankment, be close to a potential natural play or conventional play, and when we go to the community meeting next week, we'll have more imagery to share that. But then this whole idea of a grandstand, which is kind of the big thing now in the Twin Cities for a lot of high schools, there's probably opportunities to shelve that in here, but there are potentially architectural modifications to the existing concession roof overhang that would have to happen there. But the notion of shade, even on bleacher systems, is something else that could be looked at, and then potentially planting just simple notion of more shade trees that would provide north-facing shade on the embankment would be something to consider for more shade accommodations.
Did the Baseball Association talk about when you're looking for space, and this was from a long time ago,
yes.
But at one point they talked about making the big field, so field number 1, asymmetrical, so that you could get space behind the outfield, so it's not a 325 down both lines. And
yeah, so we haven't seen those plans. We heard they had done some study. I have not seen those plans, but I think if there would be something to do to try to reconfigure those lines, that would definitely help this situation. They also talked about sideline fencing, upgraded lighting, and then I think there's some other drainage issues that they thought should also be addressed. But then the whole notion of trying to improve storage capacity in the concession building too on the second level was something else they were pushing for.
I have a question about, also goes with the Courtney Fields area. So with I know you spoke of it's pretty far to walk from the parking lot up top to the main field number 1, because that's where it does get a lot of traffic, especially with high school baseball, Legion baseball.
Yep.
And I know a lot of people now they park kind of
down here.
Yeah, right down by there, and it's really small, and it also some people have started parking on Braemar Boulevard where there's even no parking sign. But has there been any talk of improving, even putting in some lines down there just to kind of make it, maybe not expand it, but just make it look more legitimate? And
another great question. Yes, we haven't really figured out what would be the best. Right now, this trail just kind of paves and then it just dumps out here to that informal parking area. I think it's somewhat challenging to have parking here, especially with the sight lines down Braemar here, to try to accommodate a more official parking accommodation there. But I'd be curious to hear whatever other people would think about that. I think that'd be the only thing that would be a challenge, but it does provide, you're right about accessible access, because this is fairly flat to get in here. The only other thing that I was advocating for is this trail with some impacts, grading impacts to probably some of the existing tree stock here. We potentially could get a 5% all the way down here and easily have a touchdown probably somewhere over here to have a 5% grade. So that'd be something else to study as part of a playground redevelopment, to have this trail potentially provide that. It's not as direct as this. And I'm not sure how that's being policed or monitored at this point. Yeah. Yes, there is Yep, there is a low retention area here that's probably associated with the turnaround, the roundabout. So we'll maybe do some additional study of that just to see if there are any other thoughts or ideas about how we could potentially look at that. So we're getting close to the end here. Except we locked up again, it looks like. No, we're... Control, delete. There we go. So we had this discussion with city staff just about the architectural character of some of the facilities, and way back when these were designed and built, they were more functional. And so we were starting to play with some ideas about how you might be able to enhance some of the just corrugated metal siding. That's kind of the big feature of the entry experience, and looking at the idea of maybe trying to incorporate some of that metal screening that was used by Braemar Field, that entry, and updating the lettering fonts and so on to kind of try to tie it in a little better. None of this is accurate, probably the type of imagery, but working with various types of public logos. The Braemar has the city, the high school. Are there some big iconic images we could put up to kind of activate it, make it look more of a dynamic place? Is some of the ideas we were playing with, in addition to just adding some more color. So this is just one idea that's probably still evolving, but as one way we were trying to think about trying to activate the space. And I know there was another staff comment last week about public art, and looking at how public art could also be a part of some of the sidewalk entries into the arena. So I think...
Sorry,
oh, yeah.
You can go back. This would also be another area where I'd be interested to find out from traffic controls, parking, whatever. There's one way into the arena for parents to drop off. It would be coming from what would be the right side. So I guess that's the north side right here.
Yep.
And then, that is really narrow there. So, so I just would be interested as you're doing this and trying to change the entry point and stuff like that and making it a safe environment or inviting environment. I think safety is part of inviting. I would see if there's something that can be done as well for within the confines of what's existing there to make that a little bit of a, not as a kind of a choke point in the parking lot area.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There, you drive down this aisle, that turnaround to get back to that is a really tough turn there without getting into the oncoming lane. So that's a good point. So yeah, there might be something we can look at just for how people are circulating through the parking. The whole idea of adding islands and so on, I think is challenging because of the loss of parking and so on. So right now, the best thing we've come up with, at least as an idea, is trying to maybe minimize the amount of hard surface with permeable paving as something to consider. So just quickly touching on natural resource component, which we think is going to be an integral part of this. Doug Mensing from Applied Ecological Services has started to mill over how we might want to think about developing natural resource management plan, and a lot of that has to do with how we think about invasives, and especially the buckthorn, which is invasive throughout. And Doug has started to identify kind of the two types of woodlands, the oak savanna and woodland areas. And some of these areas are more, that he's highlighted in light green, are probably the areas that are more likely to be, or they show the right land characteristic to be oak savannas. And then some of the wetland areas and some of those things that could be undertaken as part of a restoration plan. So a lot of this is going to be getting, I think, at some of the priorities that we want to look at for natural resources, depending on how the mountain bike trail, pedestrian trail system kind of unfolds here between the two parcels on the east and west side. So there's more information that'll be coming as the concept starts to evolve. So that is all the information that we wanted to share tonight and with the community and council next week for more comment and feedback. And I'd welcome any other thoughts, comments.
I just have a question on this natural resource. If you do those trails with the bike paths, would switching it from like that existing to the healthy be part of the trail process and creating that?
Yeah, so Doug made the comment that wherever any mountain bike trail development would occur, he thinks that the buckthorn removal process should be inherently part of that. Not only from just the impact to the land resource, but the challenge with that is, there's a lot of great buckthorn stands along the edge of the golf course that provide this great buffer. And so as part of a plan for removal of invasives, yes, there'd have to be a supplement to what you'd replace that with to maintain a buffer, and sensitivities to residents and so on, and making sure we don't have this wide open, like this type of photo where you're inclined just to see more user groups and you wouldn't be as disguised as in a buckthorn forest.
Okay, because one thing we've talked about over the last couple years is how the buckthorn is choking out the rest of the forest, and that it's a priority for us to get that cleaned up. And the residents, yes, I think, agreed with that too. But because if we keep it the way it is currently, even though it's a nice buffer, the oak woodland or the savanna will go away. It's our understanding, right?
Yes. Yeah. So the whole notion of, I think, wherever trail system, especially mountain bike trails, because there are potentially grading impacts, but I think the notion of eradicating buckthorn, then coming up with a plan for how you're going to keep the buckthorn from coming back would be something we'll unfold more in the master plan recommendations.
That's great. I think that should be a priority as part of the trail system.
And Brenda, I think you hit on a really good point there too, is how intensive of a trail system do we want to have there? Do we want to focus more on ecological enhancements? Do we want to try to do both? When you look at option A versus option B, how do you feel about an intense use on both sides, or would you prefer to have a more intense use just on one side and more walking trails and native restorations on the other side? Those are the really big decisions that we're going to have to make. So I don't know if you have any input on that tonight, or if you want to just think about it and provide input the next time that we come here. But those are the types of questions that we're going to want feedback from the public on as well.
Well, I had one question on, you said that they recommended, Mork recommended the 6 miles. Why do they recommend 6 miles?
I think some of it's just about the attractiveness of the use. When you start getting like less than 4 miles, then all of a sudden you're creating a amenity that's probably not worth developing. But I think for the high school kids too, this, a 5K loop is something that I think would be great for them to be able to use, where you can design a trail to just accommodate that type of training. But I think it was more about in terms of like, if we have 10K a trail, then we can expect that people would come here and use it. And I think there's a threshold there. You want to be careful that it's not this regional, someplace like Worth Park in Minneapolis attracts, and I'm not sure this is that place. So I think we want to find that happy medium, so that 4 to 6 miles kind of feels like it's a good maybe local use of a trail. And I'm sure there'd be other mountain bike users from surrounding communities that would also like to use the trails. So.
Ken, is there a time in your project schedule at which you have enough of a sense of the mix of alternatives that you'll be able to provide a general cost assessment of what we'd be looking at?
Yeah, I'd say by mid to late October, probably more late October, we're going to be developing cost estimates. And then, we'll be able to evaluate numbers about just per linear feet of trail. Tim has talked about the $7 to $10 a linear foot for mountain bike trails, which we can apply in various scenarios. So yeah, we'll have a more itemized cost estimate so we can see what this is all costing in terms of dollars.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I think it's out there, but I want to remind everyone that I think we're looking to enhance Braemar and find ways to utilize it 4 seasons and to bring more people as patrons for different reasons. but it's primarily golf, and we want to enhance the golf. It's the big investment is golf, so I don't want anything to detract from golf. I want it only to add, around the ends. And I think we've talked about that. I think that's pretty well agreed upon. So the mountain biking I love, but we don't want it competitive. We don't want it to be a regional. We don't want to draw folk. We want to provide a local use for mountain biking. When I see Plan B, it seems really intense. I don't even know that we want that many trails over there. So if we would decide to have it more, mountain biking there specifically and other uses elsewhere, I looked at that. Wow, there's a lot of trails. First of all, it's costly, and I don't know what it does to that area. It may probably chews it up a little more than what we were thinking. But I think you're already onto that. There's a moderate use of mountain biking that I think we're trying to look at, but we don't want to go crazy with that. And then it's going to also detract. I don't want to detract at all with any of this from the golf course itself. It's supposed to be really a world-class golf course in the end.
So Dan, I thought Plan B was the one where it had less.
I think it was,
it's more intense here.
It's all
there, but it's actually
right.
less.
Well, I think it's more intense mountain biking trails.
6 miles to 4 miles, right?
On the east side, we've kind of upped the intensity of the trails to try to gain some linear feet of trail if we eliminate it all on the west side.
So I think that in that one it was more intense use because that's where all the mountain biking is going to take place. But it just seemed really intense. It seemed like a lot of, and maybe you can add some detail. It seemed like a lot of trails.
Yeah, and part of the challenge, I think, graphically, as Tim has expressed to me, is we'd like to go to the community with these really enlarged because I think you lose perspective of the scale a little bit with our little dashed line. So we're going to enlarge those so you can get a better sense of the scale of the space and how far apart trails are and so on. So I think that would help.
Okay. And I may be overdoing it. It looked visually, like you said.
Yeah, I agree.
It really took up the space. So. Okay.
Yeah, and I would just echo that I agree that golf should be the primary, but I think it's important that we have a trail that can be utilized for, as you called it, ped bike or whatever, but pedestrians as well as mountain bikes. Some of those images where there's like the aggressive rock climbing parts of the trail, I think that you are going to deter. And I understand the mountain biking is growing, but I think we want to be able to have people of all ages to be able to come out and utilize it. I mean, especially since there's not always good sidewalks there. But I would agree, some of it was pretty aggressive in terms of honing in on all.
Okay, good comment. Yep.
And I would say to the extent you're getting feedback and you're proposing option A and option B, there's sort of the difference in mountain biking in option A and option B, but also the thing that I honed in on is there was, it looked like a large loop in option A for walking and more passive use, but option B had then a couple of smaller loops that I could see folks having an interest in, and it would be a separate discussion from, I wouldn't want people to discard option B because they see intense mountain biking and they don't like that, but they do like the loop. So I think as long as you can get some feedback to distinguish that, because if you looked at the survey, it seemed like, the biggest thing, sort of hands down, was the need for walking and biking. But having those smaller loops in addition to a bigger loop is just a different option for folks. And I wouldn't want people to say no to B because of the biking piece without distinguishing the smaller loops.
I think that's a good point, Julie, and that's what I was reacting to when Dan said that, because when I looked at B, I actually saw more walking, realizing that this was more intense, but because it is nice to have the smaller loop so you don't have to go through the whole park and just turn around if you want to go back.
That as well,
right? Okay.
The only thing I was going to say is, with mountain bikes and stuff like that, again, kind of how you had the east laid out there with some of the stuff, I would probably second or echo what is being said. I mean, there are some trails up there that I know that have been cut out over time by the neighbors that are in that area that use it for their walking and stuff like that. And so if we can try to keep as much of it as, I guess that would be my preference based off of some of the feedback that we gotten when we went through the winter recreation stuff earlier this year, or whenever that was. I can't remember exactly, but that would be one of the things. And then, with mountain biking, we run into the same, and not to kick a horse now, but you run into the same issues. You're gonna have traffic. People are gonna haul their mountain bikes. We're not providing this isn't connected to any sort of trailhead or anything like that. So, I guess for me, if I'm looking at mountain biking and stuff, and I'm looking at traffic, and I'm looking at parking and those type of things, and mountain biking happens at the same time as a golf course and those type of things, is there an opportunity to do stuff on the west side, which is not developed, or it could be, I just never have been up in that area before, behind the arena and behind the Braemar field and, around behind the dome and stuff like that. Do we have an opportunity there where you do actually have parking and, you've got baseball parking and stuff like that, but the arena maybe isn't as heavily used? I know I'm being naive because the winter seems hockey's being played all year round, but I guess that's kind of where I'm wondering if that's an option as well. So for those folks that are looking for fat tire or mountain biking and stuff. So
yeah, I think there are definitely opportunities to look at just the west side. Although I think our linear feet of trail probably starts to slip under the 4-mile threshold. But I'm sorry, I don't have the breakdown between these two in this in Concept A. But so I sense, we'll have to develop a way to try to get good sound comment feedback from the community, and then in all likelihood, there's probably going to be a blending of the two concepts, is what I'm sensing. So I think you're right. There are more concepts within these concepts to consider in terms of the detail that we'll get into next month.
Just to maybe be a little contrarian, but I really like the idea of the bike trails being spread out all around the park so that people are everywhere instead of just in a concentrated area, just using one little spot to bike. So I mean, both walking and biking, I think if you can spread people out throughout the whole acreage, it's a lot better than cramming them all into one spot. And there aren't bike trails that come here, but I think you can see the blue dots around. There's a lot of cyclists that go all around this area on the road.
And I think Valley View is also a big connector, a bike connector too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. I think that's a lot of comments.
Okay,
and a
yeah,
lot
I
of things to
appreciate
think
it.
about. Anything else you want to add before we move on? Anything from the student perspective? No. Okay, good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you
Thanks,
very
Ken.
much.
Okay, we'll move on to our next item, which is the Comprehensive Plan Committee. Anne, Susan.
Yes, I can talk to that very quickly. We are getting ready to start the comprehensive plan process. As you know, that's on your work plan. And we thought that it might be a good approach to try to get together a smaller committee of park commissioners to work on that and to report back to the entire commission. We're actually going to be asked to review goals and policies and rewrite goals and policies as needed. We'll certainly want to look back to our strategic plan and see what we want from the strategic plan to be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. And as I thought about it, I just thought it would be easier if we had a smaller group of committee members to be working on that. So that's what I'm asking for this evening, is if you agree with that and if you'd be interested in appointing some people to serve on this committee.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Does anybody want to volunteer to be on the committee?
I'd be happy to be on it.
This is the city comprehensive plan.
I know that Eileen has sent me a note and she would like to be on the committee. It looks like we can have up to 4 people. I think I'd like to be on the committee if that's good, and then we would need 2 other members. Greg?
I'd be happy to be on it.
Anyone else? And Corin? Okay. So Eileen, myself, Greg, and Corin.
That was really easy. Thank you.
Okay, next item is our work plan for next year. We do need to have this finished tonight. we'll be presenting, Greg and I will be presenting that to the City Council on October 3rd. So I know we divvied it out last time, and I thought what we could do is just touch on each of the items, and then those owners that took that away could just give a little bit of an update on what they were thinking, and then we can talk about that if we need to. So obviously the first one are all these master plans. So these are all the things we're aware of that'll continue on. So those will be on the next year's work plan as needed.
And if I could have just had one comment on that, do we want to lump those? Is our intent to be lumping those all into one initiative, or will we keep them broken out into separate initiatives?
Susan, what were you thinking? I know you put this together. Do you think they should just be one because they're all continuing initiatives? They're all relatively large independently, but.
I'm sorry, you're talking about the first one, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it could certainly go either way. We could put them on individual ones. That's what we've done in the past.
I mean, I would expect they're going to move at different speeds, and we're going to have different people assigned to them, so it seems like individual might be better, but I didn't know if maybe there was a reason why they were lumped together.
We, on a couple of them, we don't know what's going to happen either. We don't know what's going to happen with Arden Park or Fred Richards. But yeah, we could certainly break them up if you would prefer to have it that way.
For the City Council, if we don't break them out initially, will we be kind of stuck with it all being one, or as we get more definition on it, can they be broken out at that point?
I think it would be preferred to set it up originally how you would like to see it. There's certainly an opportunity to make changes, but it'll be a lot easier to start the way we want it first.
Okay, then I think we should break them out.
Okay.
Just because there'll be different members on each one. Yep.
Ask one question. Are we, if we break them out, that ends up extending our work plan, like visually, it looks like we have a lot more, and will we get pushback from, and will the City Council want to sort of constrain or walk us back from some of these new initiatives that we're talking about too, if they see, and I can't break, this is what, 4 projects that we're going to then break out, or is it 5? I just, that's my only question about if we break it out, particularly if we're not sure if some of these projects are going to move anywhere. Do you have a sense from the City Council about if we show up with a 3-page work plan, if we'll get some pushback on that?
Yeah, it's absolutely a very valid question. The council is very concerned about the size of work plans. So it's absolutely a very valid question. Considering the fact that we don't know exactly the intensity on some of these, I honestly think this one could go either way. If you feel strongly that they be broken up, we could certainly do it that way.
So my only question would be, if we are still tentatively scheduled to have our April work session with the City Council, can we submit something now, and then if it needs to be revised in April, because we have a better sense of Fred Richards is moving forward and it needs to be its own thing, but Weber Woods and Arden are still in limbo. Like, do we have that kind of catch in April to be able to do some amendment to this at that point?
A little bit, but I would say that preferred not to make that type of a change. Like, for example, we are moving the Weber Woods plan into next year. Some of those changes are unforeseeable, certainly, but I think our goal would be to try to get it as set as we possibly can at this point for approval.
I do think it's important that they can see that we have a lot of the initiatives that we might work on. Some of these are really large initiatives if they move forward. So I'm not too concerned. And they're the ones who own whether or not they want us to work on them, so it gives them a perspective on, well, if we haven't worked on all of these, it'll be difficult for them to get to this. But
I guess I would say if we break them out, I think maybe it might be helpful to just mention that the intensity and the amount of work that some of these will take will depend on, in large part, council action. And so when they see that, when you're presenting it visually, so that to the extent we want to work on some of these new initiatives, that they're aware that some of these may take a significant amount of time, or may be essentially done sooner rather than later.
okay, so let's move on to the next one, which was the funding projects. And Mike and Dan, you guys were putting some thoughts around that. So.
Well, we actually had a meeting, and you probably want to take the lead on this. I think you had written up some notes and whatnot, so I'll let you do that, and I'll fill in if there's any need at the end with some of my comments.
Yeah, so Dan and I met, and Dan also brought in a person from Edina Community Foundation, Dick Crockett, and we met with him also last week. And essentially what we learned from Dick about what the Community Foundation is I would call it basically an administrative infrastructure for fundraising. So they assist. They don't assist in the fundraising itself, but they assist in the management of the projects and the management of the money, and they actually hold the money and disperse it as the leadership sees fit. They don't make decisions. They just do the disbursement and manage it, and they manage the tax side of things, and they manage the rules, and so there's a lot of aspects to fundraising that none of us are knowledgeable about that they can take off our plate. So it was a very good meeting. They've actually worked with currently about 60, at least 60, because this is only a partial list, other organizations in Edina, Family Center, Fire Department, boys hockey, boys tennis, girls hockey, lacrosse, wrestling, Edina Arts Center, Edina Garden Council, Torchlight Concerts, football, et cetera, et cetera. So they've got a lot of expertise and experience with the community also. So it was a good first discussion to try to get our head around some of the details of what this plan would be. Some other things that we discussed outside of that are the setting the long-term goals. What is this funding actually? What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve something big and long-term, or are we trying to focus on individual projects here and there? We have our opinion on what we think it should be, but it's going to be up to the commission to decide on what we want. So that's then we start to naturally then get into the steps of the project. So we've got infrastructure, we've got our long-range goals, we've got our fundraising vehicles that we have to identify, and that of course will be driven by what we want our long-term goals to be. We've got our infrastructure decision and administration decision. Hopefully that'll be a pretty easy one. And then we have to identify the possibility of staff help and or budget considerations if we're doing something outside of the traditional budget. And any approvals that would be needed from the council also. And we don't know, that's an area that we don't know if, what they would have to approve or not approve, and whether they want to get involved in it or not. But because just to kind of give people a concept of the range of what we're thinking, the small, like, maybe signage, we want to enhance signage. That's a little project. We're not going to get anything from the city budget, so maybe we want to try to raise money for it, and so we set out a goal to raise $100,000. Okay, great, we achieve it, done. on to the next thing. So that's the one end of the rainbow. The other end of the rainbow is really creating an endowment fund like a university would. So we've got a pool of money. We're constantly raising money. We've got an endowment, and really we're using it on an ongoing basis for projects here and there. And this would be, really as an endowment fund is in perpetuity for the city. That's the way Dan and I were kind of leaning more towards.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're looking at and why we've talked about this for many years, and the apparatus we have and the processes we have in place have seemingly been fine for small projects. But now we're looking at maybe a structural, complete change of where we're getting our money. We're not getting as much revenue from the liquor stores. There doesn't seem to be budgetary room to give us any more money in the short term and maybe the long term. But we have a lot of grand ideas. So now we're talking about it in earnest because of that, and then we're like, well, then we need to have a different apparatus. And Dick really suggested, he does a lot of this work, and he had some really good ideas, but there's other commissions like ours that utilize this, and there's other park organizations that have an endowment, and Central Park is one of them in New York, and there's some other large ones. And they use it where you might set a target, and maybe it's large enough where you say we need to hire a professional fundraising firm, and we pay them $80,000 a year, and hopefully they raise $400,000 a year, and we take a look at maybe doing something like that to get serious about it and build up an endowment where you have, I don't just make it, but $4 or $5, $10 million in principal. That gives you enough at a 10% return, and then you get $10 million. You get something to spend that we can put into the budget, right? And then you let it grow. And then it really takes some of the heat off and the pinch off of what's going on. So that's the direction we lean towards, and we have to talk about it and come up with, does that make sense? And if so, then we should probably take a look at doing it, getting some approval. He also, the one thing he said that we hadn't thought about, but he highly suggested that we have it, and it's a nonprofit fund, and it is organized for and controlled by this group, with one person as they become. He suggested, it's going to be probably the board chair, the commission chair, and they sign off on the final spending and disbursement of the funds. It takes it away from the city. It has to go through the city process and agreed upon that this is what it's going towards. But at the end, if everything lines up, and then the money itself would be dispersed from us. So we hadn't really thought about that, but he had talked about some of the reasons why, and we don't want to get into that tonight. But there's some things to think about and discuss, and as a board, if that's what we want to go towards, we have a mechanism. He really said, this is what they do, and it's a natural fit for Edina. He does it for a lot of organizations in Edina. He knows us well. He knows the city well. It makes a lot of sense, right? I think so. I don't see any hurdles to doing that, but we have to decide. We want to go big, we want to go small. What are we trying to do with this exactly? And then we can really, that's what we got to talk about, and then we can go from there. So,
right. And I think, again, to reiterate, it does seem that money for projects isn't as available as before, and I think if we want to maintain and increase the quality of our park system in the community, that we'll probably have to start thinking outside the box and thinking outside the taxpayer dollars usage.
Great.
So,
okay, great.
Putting that into the steps into the project plan that.
So what would be really helpful, Mike, is if you could summarize that for Greg and for myself for the meeting, because I think what we're saying here is we've identified a need there from a funding perspective. There's a lot of initiatives we want to work on, and we'll be defining it over the next several months to bring back to the council, right? That's kind of where we are right now. We don't know exactly the direction. We're thinking that we would definitely partner, though, with the Edina Community Foundation in our work, and then figure out exactly how big we think it could be.
There might be an agenda. This is not it. I don't want to add it to the agenda tonight, but there might be an agenda item where we take half an hour and talk about some of these issues and then decide and say, this is the direction we want to go. Without that, I think we need that as a next step, because then we can make some sense of what we're doing. It's kind of go big or go home as far as we see it, but that might not be the way the commission sees it.
Right.
But we can make those arguments that, if you'd like to put it on the agenda, that might make some sense. So.
We had is this one yours, Julie?
I think so. Communications and marketing.
Yeah, communications and marketing. Yep.
Yeah. So I reached out to Matt and Corin because I know that I got tasked with this one, but I know that you two have both been, I think, the most engaged on the communications and marketing needs. So feel free to jump in. But I think as far as what the work plan is essentially to either be creating a communications plan for the Park Commission and the Parks and Recreation Department, or to the extent there is a communications plan developed with the City of Edina that incorporates the Park and Rec Department to get an understanding of that and engage in ways that it can be improved. And one of the things we talked about is, in each meeting we talk about how we're informing the public about these new projects, but is there a standard, how do we use Twitter, how do we use social media, what email lists are available to be sending things out. I think following our last meeting, there was a recommendation that we push out the information about the new tennis courts and basketball court surface, and I got that. But do we have a plan? Is there a standard way that we're pushing this information out, or is it being done sort of ad hoc? And really digging into that. And then also, what can we be doing as commission members to be advancing the communication of the work that we are doing and that the department's doing? So looking at those two things. Did you have thoughts, additions?
I think my only other question was, I know that there is a communications department, and I think we need some better visibility of what they are communicating, in particular around things that impact us and what their timelines are. So not that they owe us an every week check-in, but I think it's important for us to know at the end, like what bullets you want us to share out, and then what the communications team is already doing, so that we are all looking like we're one united front. Because that feels to me, even like the signage is a good example of when I feel like we were not a united front. So I think that it would be helpful to get a better visibility. And I don't know, Ann, what the right way of getting that is, but I think it's important that we are able to have visibility of what they are doing.
And I do think I don't know if it's appropriate for the work plan, but the staff needs, obviously Susan, but do we have to get buy-in from the communications department, because they're a separate group? I think it is. We do a lot of work for the community, and what we're doing is really, I think if the community doesn't know the work we're doing and the work that the department's doing, we're sort of failing at our job. And part of what we're here for is ambassadors to the community about what the commission's doing, what the department's doing. And so I think, I hope that they would be willing to engage with us, but I don't know if that's a hurdle.
Yeah, and just jumping off what Julie just said, I think for me, the question has always been how they're doing it. I think that, like, again, in the time that I've spent on the Park and Recreations Committee, we've been a part of some discussions around some pretty hot button topics for the community. And I think that one of the things that's consistently been said in all those meetings is how did you tell us? How do we know? So I think it'd be really nice, and echoing also what Corin said, to have visibility to what the communications team is thinking, if they've got some sort of schedule or how they're planning on doing this, because I think as we move forward, it's nice to let people know the nice to knows as well as the need to knows. I just quickly did some really raw calculations, but there's about 7,500 people between Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram that are signed up to look. And if those are all unique users, which probably aren't the case, but let's just call them unique, that's not even a sixth of our city. So, I think that's some information that I'd like to understand what they're planning on doing to promote this and to get more in community involvement. So.
Okay, good. Yep, I think we can write that up. So it's really about teaming up with the communications department and figuring out how to utilize communication to let the community know about our upcoming events, agendas.
In addition to that, I think it's important that we, at this meeting, every month, excuse me, we get, call it 2 or 3 bullets that we can use from, like, that you guys owe us to say, here's what we want you to evangelize, whatever the topics may be, if it's the dome is coming up or down or whatever it is, that we know what those hot button topics are, so we are sharing that out, or if it's talking about the lid, whatever. Just, I think that's important for us to know, like, if there's 3 things you shared out, what would those 3 things be? So I would say
and
that
I think
could be
Ann
an
tries to do
addition.
that in her staff comments as well. So what I feel like we're really lacking is that link with the communications department and how information gets disseminated and how our information is viewed on the website, or how people are able to access the information that we have. I think that's what we should focus on, and I think we should continue to get the updates that Ann has.
I agree. I just think that it would be nice if we could get those in writing. Like, here's how they can say them, so we're using the right verbiage and the right, that's what I'm saying. So I think it's an and, because we are getting it, but it's usually coming at almost 10 o'clock at night. So, like, we're probably all going to go home and not talk about our meeting right away, so that we make sure that we have the right, go back to our context and say, here's exactly what we want to make sure the right verbiage we're saying, and
consistent messaging.
Like my takeaway from what I got out of our July meeting and what Matt heard were totally different. So, perfect example of, we both sat and watched the same thing, so making sure that we are using the right verbiage in terms of that. So that's where I think it's important.
Good. Yep.
That's all I want to rephrase that.
Yep. Okay. So our next initiative was on the field capacity, and Greg, you and Eileen worked on that one?
Yes. Eileen and I had a virtual meeting, kind of went over some of these items. So quick recap would be, the project is Edina Playfield Study, Capacity and Utilization. Clearly, from the issues that we're dealing with, we're extremely short on field capacity, and so the intent is to dig into that more intentionally next year. The Sports Association community has created a grid to exhibit just how fully scheduled our fields are for each season, so that's a good starting point for us. But when assessing full capacity, we want to make sure that that's a consideration of both Edina Park Space and Edina School District fields. So our intent on this is that the Park and Rec Commission should facilitate a joint assessment with the Edina School District to present its own view and help inform future use of park space. It would also be good, we thought, to draft suggesting that Val would be a good add to our team from her ties back to the school. And Matt, certainly, if you've got time and would like to join, your passion and ties to the association would be a perfect fit as well. So if you'd be willing to join us, we'd love that. Target on this would be to have a first draft completed by the end of March, so first quarter of 2018, and then be able to kind of test that through some of the associations, the school district, what we're hearing on actual usage, with the intent, we think it would be useful to have a second draft available by spring sports season, so we could in fact do some auditing. And says, okay, this field says it should be full. These hours, is it indeed full? All right, do we have teams that are actually using it? So we can audit across a section of our fields and have a completed and a published final product to be available during the third quarter of 2018. So that would be the plans. We could either kind of do it, we would hope, potentially on our own, or we could use people from the Sports Association. Hadn't thought about that second layer yet, Mike, but I think that if we have a document that now says this is what we're hearing, is the capacity, is it really happening?
So I'll gladly join, and I'll give you 2 pieces of information. One, they have a utilization study. The soccer club has done it for all of those fields, and I can get it now. That might be outdated because it might be a couple years old, but I can get that information for you, and you may already have that.
I think that's probably the grid that we had, but we should just check and make sure.
And 2, and I don't want to start a firestorm, but does it make sense to add rinks to this? Because I'd love to find out as I drive around the community in the middle of the winter, and we have all that space dedicated to rinks, and there's no one skating on them. So are there other opportunities for that space to be used for other things, i.e. in the summertime, because the idea was, or the feedback has been, well, we don't want to put grass down because the ice will not let the grass come back to seed. Well, then does it make sense to take those boards down or leave those boards up? And you've got another opportunity for some other sport that's coming up. There's recreational things that I know kids play, like there's gaga ball and all these different type of things, and in soccer or whatever. I just don't know I think the rinks to me feel like something that needs to be looked at. So
certainly would be open to that consideration. You're right, it could open up quite a big discussion in another direction, but I think it certainly fits what we're trying to do.
That's almost like talking about cutting Social Security in Edina.
It's the third rail of sports in Edina, right?
I just said ice rinks. I didn't say anything else.
And Ann, I know when we brought this up, you had said you thought you might have someone in your department that was also going to be working on this. If that's still the case from your resources, obviously we'd love to have that addition too.
Yeah, I think Tiffany would be she works with our sports programs. I think she would be the logical choice.
Okay, good.
So, Ann, we still have time for people to sign up for these different projects, or do we need to have that defined today?
No, absolutely. That's only important to you. The council isn't going to be looking at that. They'll only be looking at the projects themselves.
Okay, perfect. So everybody has time to think about these projects and then determine which ones they'd like to be part of. And that also goes with any of the carryover projects. If you're interested in, maybe you weren't working on it this year, but you want to work on it next year, we can change that around too. I think that's everything we had for our work plan, and I want to thank everybody for putting all the time and effort and thinking through it. That was really helpful. So the next item is correspondence and petitions. Were there any questions on the information that was attached in the packet or discussion? Nope. Okay. Okay, the next item is our chair and member comments, and I just wanted to start by thanking Janet for all the work that she did putting the letters together for us for our park assignments. Really great work, very professional. I think this is a really good add to our process. And so if you can just make sure to sign the letters and get those back to Janet, she'll get those mailed tomorrow. So thank you very much for doing that for us. And are there, okay, yep. Mm-hmm. Give her a round of applause. So any other comments from the commission?
The only other question I had was more Susan, and do we have an idea on the signage timeline when those are going to come, when we start seeing those pop up?
Installation is scheduled for end of October.
Perfect. Thank you.
I have a comment, and I had to prepare it, so bear with me. But as members of the Park and Recreation Committee, we know that there are groups of people that are important to the success of the Parks and Rec Department. First and foremost, our Parks and Rec staff. Then there are residents, and lastly, there are other groups of residents that volunteer and dedicate their time, effort, and love of this community to the various boards that oversee the youth activities and athletics that Edina offers. I just wanted to take a moment to recognize one of the volunteers that our community lost last week. 6 years ago, Chelsea Korsh started the Edina Youth Cheer Program. The program, which was offered to 5th and 6th grade girls, was designed to provide an opportunity to learn cheer fundamentals, show team spirit at Edina youth football games, and help build self-confidence for those girls that participated. Chelsea worked tirelessly at all hours of the day to get this program up and running. Not only did she accomplish that, she saw the program become a success with hundreds of young women passing through the program. In 2015, Edina was a recipient of the Edina Connecting with Kids Award for her work with Edina Youth Cheer. Others knew her because she volunteered with the Edina Football Board, supported Edina basketball, and volunteered for many other activities that her 4 children were involved in. It has been said, if you need help, try the busiest person in the room. More often than not, that was Chelsea Korsh. Chelsea passed away last week. Many in this community knew her. She was a treasure to this community, supported her in many of the activities that our city provides to our youth, and she loved watching her children participate and compete in many of the parks that we all hold dear. I just wanted to take time tonight to recognize Chelsea Korsh. Thank you, Chelsea. You'll be missed.
Yep, thanks for sharing that, Matt. Okay, we'll move on to Anne and staff comments.
Thank you very much, Brenda. I just have a few things this evening. First of all, I wanted to let you know that the golf course construction continues to move along well. We are anticipated to finish that construction in mid-October this year. Also in mid-October, we will begin the dome installation. It seems like we just took it down. We're getting ready to put it back up again. We hope to have the dome inflated by the end of October. It takes, even after the dome is inflated, it takes a couple of weeks to get all the netting up, all the fire equipment installed. It's a very big process, so we're looking forward to getting that started. We have some courts under construction. I think that you are all aware. We have the Todd Park tennis courts, the Normandale tennis courts, the Strackhauer Park basketball courts, all currently under construction. And later this fall, we will also be redoing the Pamela Park tennis courts. Another big project that we've been working on this summer is some updates to the 1997 Park Bond shelter buildings. It's hard to think that those buildings are already 20 years old and are needing maintenance. So we did some re-roofing on those buildings. We did some new carpet in those buildings, and exterior siding maintenance and painting and door painting as well. So we hope to get many more years out of those buildings, and those are some good projects to get completed this summer. And that is all I have.
Great, thank you, Anne. So that brings us to the end of our meeting, and so if I could get a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
And great. All in favor? Aye. Okay, we're adjourned.